And now I'm going to share my screen, and you should be able to see my screen. And you can see, I hope, the markdown thing. So yeah, as you see here, 8 full stack app, or sorry, 7 React.js. That's what we're going to be working with this week. Today is obviously day 1. What I've done for most of these is we have the markdown doc like this, React Essentials. This is obviously it before we're seeing it in the markdown preview. The same thing as right here. And then I have an examples folder for each thing, and that just has essentially projects for when we want to talk about something, because I know that a lot of people try and live code while we're doing stuff, and I understand that because coding is a very hands-on thing. But often it's not possible to be live coding stuff in real time because part of programming is making mistakes. And if you saw me create this stuff, you'd see I make mistakes too, and I run into errors, and that's going to happen when you're doing something live. So it'll be better in general to just sort of follow along with these, but I designed them such that, we're going to have sort of multiple components, and we might be able to comment something in or out, and that'll help us just see that one thing without having to code it from scratch. Okay, so this is what we're going to be talking about today. Instead of breaking down all the topics, we're just going to say we're going to be talking about React today. And the first thing we're going to be starting with is where we came from. So what do we know about front end so far? And then eventually we're going to get into the essentials of React and then certain common patterns you'll see in React, so we can, start working with React in its most essential form. Okay, so the first question I think we should always ask is, what problem are we trying to solve? So why are we introducing a new technology? And this isn't just true for class, this is true for being a good engineer, which is the best question you can ask is essentially why, because you might think the right solution to some business problem is like building a website, and then you and a team of 10 people spend a year building that website. You build the front end, you build the back end, this, that. And then what you eventually realize is you were answering the wrong question. So you solved this whole big problem, but that wasn't your real problem. And so that was kind of wasted effort. And really good engineers just ask the right questions, because you can avoid, a whole year of doing the wrong thing if you ask the right questions that lead you to solving the right problem. So our first question is, what problem are we trying to solve? Well, we've seen backend recently, and backend is all about backend is about persistence in terms of the database. So that's making sure the data, stays put and is going to be accessible in the future. And if you update it, that update is going to be persisted into the future. And then backend is also about, APIs and, taking that data you put in the database and revealing it to the world, and, giving access points if someone wants to grab that data, but also if someone wants to update something in that database. So our backend is sort of our source of truth. It's where all the data lives and where all the data gets updated. Whereas our front end is our interface for the average user. So if I were just to go to a website, let me go to Hacker News over here. Let me click that. So this is Hacker News. This is, a website, and obviously there's a backend going on somewhere, because we see there's all of these links, and they had to come from somewhere. If I were to inspect, I probably could go into the network tab. I'm going to refresh, and I'll see yeah, we made some requests, and some of these requests were, asking for the website itself, the HTML. Some of them were asking for the style sheet or an image, like that Y over there is an image we actually requested. This is, this JavaScript script is something that's running on the page. Interesting. I guess this makes sense. I'm noticing there's no unique network request happening, because really all we're doing seemingly is we're talking to that server when we go to news.ycombinator.com. We're requesting a specific HTML page, and that HTML page might, include some other things as requests, but really we're just getting a page that's been pre-made. And looking at this page, you can kind of see it's a pretty simple page. You kind of what we already know about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, we know how to do this. Like we will take some data, we'll use it to build up an HTML page, we serve it up, and then that whole request response cycle is done. And you don't need too much interactivity here. Like there's links to click, but this is a relatively, standard website. This is a website that you could make in the 90s with, just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So let me go back. I guess I'll put that over here. Right. So that sort of web page like this, we're saying like, okay, Hacker News is something we already know how to create with, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but there's more complicated kinds of websites. So if I look at a pretty complex example of a website, Google Docs, look at this website. This is still ultimately just HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, but there's so much more going on. Like every time I move my mouse, I'm seeing that little highlight of hovering, and I can click on something and I see that like loading bar and the page is starting to update and I get this whole brand new view, but I didn't actually go to a different website. This is all the same singular website. And the fact that you can do this on a website that I'm typing and it immediately updates, that isn't like the Hacker News thing. Hacker News is something that you could totally see how this is made of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript because it's just a poster, basically. It's a mildly interactive poster. Whereas Google Docs is a real application almost. It's like an application running on your computer, but it's running through a browser. And that's a relatively complicated task. And one way we could see that is that if they let me see the developer console, there we go. We can ignore all of this, but if we look in the network tab and I reload, you'll see there's way more going on, like almost too much. It's kind of nuts. This wouldn't be reasonable to sort of build from scratch with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. It can be done because those technologies are what's under the hood ultimately. And for example, Gmail was an early example of one of these types of complex apps that was done purely in standard HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we call that sort of complex app a single page application. And all we mean by that is it's technically a website, just like Hacker News. It's just an interactive poster. But it's so seamless to use and it's so responsive to user events like clicking or scrolling or typing, and it reacts in response to those events. It's so seamless that it's almost like an app just running directly on your computer, even though it's just a website. And that's what React is for. So HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, great for building something like Hacker News, but great for building, the 1997 Space Jam website, which is still up if you want to check it out. It's a pretty cool website. But if you're going to try and build something like Gmail or Google Docs or Facebook, especially Facebook, because that's why they invented React, this approach of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript gets very complex. It's not really so well designed for it. And that's why, even though those are still the technologies running under the hood, we kind of want like a framework that makes it easy, that you sort of abstracts above that level. So the first thing we're going to do is look at our current solution with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And that is over here. So that's actually just, in 7 day 1 examples. The first thing, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. So I'm going to open that in a separate folder. So I could use Live Server. If you remember, Live Server is that VS Code extension that lets me serve something up without, too much effort. I'm just looking at the chat right now. Okay. Just looking at the chat, I want to say, yeah, Hacker News is a website that you probably could build, which is, why it's a good example of that. And I see some people talking about SPA, MVC, NVVC. I would ignore that for now. SPA, single page application, that's a phrase you can use just to mean these sort of more complex websites. MVC and MVVC are what we would call sort of approaches to this problem of front end, but I don't think they're super helpful. MVC means model view controller. MVVC means model view controller. It took a while for people to figure out what a good pattern for this stuff was. And I know that Angular eventually started calling themselves MVW, model view, whatever, because these aren't necessarily the best ways to think about it. I would say ignore MVC, MVVC. We're just going to learn React, and React will be that. React is essentially the end result of all these attempts to find approaches to front-end development that made sense. But yeah, let's open that example thing. So I'm going to go here. Tell me if I should make this bigger. So yeah, we're going to go in here, go to day 1, go to examples. And now I'm going to open up that HTML, CSS, JavaScript thing. And this is everything you should have seen before. So I'm going to use live server. And that should open it up over here. And as you see, I have a website here. So let's kind of look at it side by side to understand what this website is. So naturally, when I go to a website, when I go slash here, really that's going to slash index.html, because this will be true with React too. If you just go to the root of a URL, it's going to look for a page called index.html. That's just a standard name that you don't get to choose. And that's going to be the first page. So if I were to go directly there, same exact thing. But there's also these other files here. Like if I were to go to style.css, that is there. It's just a file. And same with, main.js. It's just a file. But I want to see something. So instead I go to just standard slash, and what gets opened up is index.html. I suppose let me just put this on a separate page so we can jump back and forth. And index.html is just an HTML page. So we're writing the HTML page ourselves, just like you do it in a standard way. It's got this head, which defines some things. In this case, we have a title here. So that title is over here, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, MVC example. And then we have a style sheet we're linking to, which is this style sheet over here. And we have a JavaScript script we're linking to, which is this one over here. And then we actually have a body here. And my body starts like this. But yeah, so just to show you, if we look in the network tab, and I usually have to refresh to see that. That's all we're asking for. So I'm not sure what this WebSocket thing is. That's probably from live server, but basically we're only asking for these basic files of CSS and JavaScript. I don't know why the CSS is not here. Maybe because it inlined it did something fancy. But basically that's all we're working with, these 3 files. And HTML is sort of the root file that pulls in the other 2. And as you see my body here, my body starts out very simple. I have a button, and that button is going to be referencing a function, which, what is that function? Well, it's going to exist in the JavaScript. And we're associating it with this on click. So when the button is clicked, something will happen. And then I have a H1 Pokemon. And then I have this UL here where I gave it an ID, but there's nothing in there. So you might be asking, why did I do that? Well, the style is just, to give us some colors and, associate things with classes and IDs. But if I look in main.js, that's the real body of what's going on. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm grabbing this results container. So I'm looking for an element with ID Pokemon list. And that's this list over here. So the list has nothing in it right now, but still it's a list because I'm going to want to target it for adding something. And then I had that, okay, so I have some list of existing Pokemon. I have this helper function, get random element, which is just going to give me a random element of an array, which I'm going to use to get a random one of these Pokemon. And then I have this add Pokemon button. So, that is being referenced in the HTML, but it really lives in the JavaScript. And then this is that function. So when that button is clicked, this is called. And what I do is I'm going to get a random element from the list Pokemon. We don't really need to know the specifics of how this works, but this is going to give me a random element of either Pikachu, Squirtle, Charmander, Bulbasaur. And then I'm creating an actual new element, a new LI. So this new list item here, it's as if I'm just creating a blank, LI over there, but obviously I can't write this in JavaScript. JavaScript doesn't understand HTML. So I have to do it like this. I'm saying create a new element that's an li. And then I use these, these fields within, the object that is new list item. I use these keys to fill some stuff in. So I'm saying, okay, give it the inner text of that name. So let's say it was Bulbasaur. It's going to look like that, Bulbasaur. And then I'm saying give it a certain class name. So it's as if it's going to now have something that looks like that as well. And then finally, I'm saying take that results container, so the one up here, which is this Pokemon list, and add that li to it with this function called append. So I'll take that out because it won't work with that in there. And what does that get us? Well, at the end of the day, we end up with this simple app where, I can click add random Pokemon. It adds a Pokemon to this list. So if I were to inspect, I would see, yeah, I had that UL here. I added the li with the class and the text Pikachu in here. And because it had class Pikachu, we actually can look in the style and see, okay, I actually just define something with class name Pikachu with color yellow. So I can keep doing that and I'll get, all these different Pokemon there. And this is what a standard HTML, CSS, JavaScript website looks like. And it works relatively well, but part of this was to demonstrate to you how it probably feels it's probably a little frustrating how you're always looking at like 3 files simultaneously. Your HTML matters, your JavaScript matters, and your CSS matters. And the CSS is a little bit to the side, but the HTML is, needs to reference the JavaScript. So if I'm in my HTML, I need to say, okay, what does that button do? Well, it calls a function. Where's that function defined? It's defined in the JavaScript. But then inside the JavaScript, I might want to, do something in the HTML. I want to add, this new element to a certain, element that's already in there. And how do I get that element? Well, I have to reference the HTML using like document.getElementById from the JavaScript. So this is a little broken in my opinion, that the HTML has to reference the JavaScript. The JavaScript has to reference the HTML. There's not one source of truth. You're kind of jumping back and forth all the time. And this can get frustrating at the least, but as you scale up, it gets incredibly complex. And we don't really have the time to show that. It's something that you kind of just have to experience in real life, but increasingly you won't because of modern technologies around this. But if you try and build a really big HTML, CSS, JavaScript app, you're going to have lots of JavaScript files and you might have multiple HTML files and they're all going to have to reference each other and it can get very spaghetti code-like very fast. So before we start talking about it, anything we want to say or questions about this example of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, where I called HTML, CSS, JavaScript MVC here. I should change that, but that's what it was originally called because this is an example on some level of MVC, model view controller. Model meaning your data. So like your JavaScript, view meaning like your HTML, it's what you actually see, and controller meaning like the JavaScript has to control the HTML, but that's not really so relevant. I'll take that out. But yeah, questions about this example, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Should I just start talking about it a little more? Yeah, what I have here is just breaking it down a little more. So index.html is the skeleton of our app. It references the other two things and it provides the basic starting structure of the page. So the HTML we saw here, it does represent the page, and especially this part, pulls in all the things it needs, but this doesn't represent the page forever. It only represents the starting point of the page. If we look at the actual page, once I start interacting with the JavaScript, I start adding to the page and the page changes. So HTML doesn't really represent the page. It just represents the starting point of the page. Then there's style.css. That's kind of okay. Style.css is pretty self-contained, doesn't reference the JavaScript or the HTML. It's just associating certain elements with certain, certain selectors with certain visual properties. And then within the HTML, we're ultimately referencing those classes. So at least we're only referencing things one way there, where, the HTML, or, if we're using the JavaScript and we're creating a new HTML thing, that might reference those classes. That's going to automatically look a certain way as a result. And then finally, there's actually 4 things, because before I get to the JavaScript, we want to mention the DOM. So the DOM is the actual object that represents the page. So like we said, if we're looking at the HTML, that just represents the starting point of the page. That starting point of the page ultimately gets stored in a JavaScript, a variable JavaScript is aware of called document. And that's how we actually interact with the page in JavaScript, as if it was an object. And then we can add to that object and manipulate it, look for things or add things to it. And that will change the page. So if I go back here, the HTML was our starting point, but this whole thing here, I would call this the DOM. And if we actually want to see the DOM, we actually just write document in here and hit enter. So you see, this is, the page document. And they're showing it to us as if it's an HTML page, but really it's an object, because an HTML page is, just, a document. But in this case, if I say dot, I can see all this information, because document is an object and it actually represents the entirety of the page. So I can actually say document dot location, and it's telling me information about, this is the URL you're at, here's the port you're on, here's the path name. I could say document dot, body, and it's now just going to return the body of it. What else is in here? Document dot, as you see, it's very big. And really, ultimately, what we use it for is things like that get element by ID. So if I say get element by ID, and what was that ID we were looking at? I could just go here and look. It was Pokemon-list. So I say get element by ID, Pokemon-list, just like I did in the JavaScript. I'm actually getting, it's a little, because they're being nice and rendering it for us. It looks like it's HTML, but really it's an object. So I can, just save it and say like, let my elem equal that. And now if I start looking at my elem, I can say things like, okay, I want to, change something about it. And there's all these values that represent what's actually in there. So I might even be able to say like my elem.click. Well, I guess nothing happened because I didn't set up any like click listener. But there's, my element, I guess we can show the one we did use, which is append. And then, I can append an element on there, but I would have to first, create it. So this won't work, I don't think, if I try and say like H1. If I try and just add something like that, I don't know. It added something, but as you see, it didn't understand it was HTML. It just added text. But that's ultimately what we're doing. We're using this document object. So the HTML that we originally get over here, this HTML, that's what creates the document originally. And then the document is the DOM, which just stands for document object model. It represents the document as an object. And then main.js allows us to use that variable document to manipulate the document, either getting things from it or, adding things to it. And that's how we change a page as a user interacts with it. And then this fourth thing here was main.js, which is where, we sort of glued the two things together. That's, main.js references document, which was informed by index.html. And that's what gives us a full web page. But part of demonstrating this was to show you that this is a little bit of a cumbersome approach. So any questions about this right now? Yeah, I can slow down, Roger. Yeah, I understand. I feel like I can end up going a little fast with this stuff. I wanna slow down. Yeah. Because we haven't got into the React stuff yet. It's important that we recognize this is just what we've seen already. but we don't necessarily need to understand it so well. It's really just to show you where we're coming from.
Yeah, I mean it's not too bad. It's just that you're flipping through like three different files,
Yeah,
and then you're saying this is doing this and this is doing this, and I'm
yeah,
like trying to like, remember like all right, this is what is happening right here, and I'm just trying to read it, trying to understand it.
yeah.
It's not too bad, just like a tad bit slower, please.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's good feedback. Yeah. Can definitely slow down. So, do we want to go through this a little more, like actually what's going on here? You're sure?
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay. But if people do have questions, the more interactive this is, the better. Because I see like Grace's question here, how come all those LIs that get made don't get updates and added to our index.html doc? Yeah, that's a great question, right? Because as we see, so we'll go through this a little slower, like we have our index.html. All we're defining here is the body, and it has this UL, but there's no LIs in there. And we're going to flip back to the page now, the actual visual representation. So when we reload, that's all there is. And there is this LI, but it's invisible. There's nothing in there. But we had this on click, and that on click references the JavaScript. And the JavaScript has a function in it called add Pokemon. And when it's clicked, this function gets executed. And this is just getting us that specific Pokemon, but we're actually creating a new element, Li. We're filling in some details, and then we're actually adding it to the page. I just pulled this out up here where we're actually specifically looking for that element so that we can add something to it. But what Grace was asking is, why doesn't that update the HTML page? So going back to the site, every time I click this, you'll see on the right here, we actually are adding something. We're adding something to the DOM. We're adding something to sort of the living page. But naturally, when I do that, we're not changing the HTML page. It's because the HTML page only represents a starting point. It's what the page looks like when it's originally loaded, but very quickly, it's not the source of truth. That DOM is the source of truth. The word document in JavaScript, that's the source of truth. So the HTML page only represents our starting point. And pretty quickly, what we care about is not the starting point, but the starting point as it's gotten updated. So Grace, is that helpful?
Yes, it is. Sorry, you and Don answered it.
Cool. Yeah, and you one reason that we could say that it's temporary, the reason why it's temporary, the reason why it's not updating the index.html page is because someone else could have gone to this website. When they first go to the website, they shouldn't see what I did. They should see, it's starting from scratch. And then they have their own experience with it. So the HTML page just represents the starting point so that whoever's looking at the site, they're having their own experience, as opposed to everyone who uses the site is updating the original thing, and everyone else who uses it has to see those updates, which doing that would actually be pretty complex. Okay, so that's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript as we've known it using this simple site. Any questions about it before we move on to talking about some of the limitations of this approach? So Grace is asking, the DOM is like the temporary unique experience for each user. Yeah, more or less. Bless me. So the DOM is the fact that when we first start this page, we just have that HTML page, but that's just a starting point. And if we want to use JavaScript to interact with it, that JavaScript has to work with an object, because JavaScript doesn't work with HTML directly. And so that the DOM is referenced by this variable document, and it's the document we're working with. And every time we update the document, we're changing the page. So I could say document.getElement by class name. wait, no, by get element. Let's say I wanted to get the body, get elements by name. Like, let's say I wanted to get just the body, because we do have something in there called body. I would get something like this, but I see that, the nature of this one is it gives me multiple things possibly. So I just want the first one. And now you see it's highlighting it. And then from there, I might say, oh, actually, I want you to append something to it. And to make it simple, I'm just going to add words. And now that gets added to the page. So it's a temporary thing in parts that everyone could have a different experience, but really it's the fact that if you want interaction, that means there's a starting point and then there's something that, the page is going to change in response to interaction. So HTML is the starting point. It's just a document. It's not code. It can't do anything. It only represents something. So HTML and CSS, they're what are called markup languages. They can't do anything. They're not programming languages. They can represent something. They can represent data. They can't manipulate data. JavaScript is a programming language. It can manipulate data. And in order to do that, document is this object that represents the entire page. And then we can, use methods on it to grab some data or a method on it to change some aspect of that data. And then the page updates in response. So really the point of the DOM is that I can now update the page in real time. So unlike a page like Hacker News, where it looks like this when you get it, and it always looks like this. There's no way to interact with it other than clicking links, which if you do click a link, it brings you to an entirely new page. There's a refresh there. It's a new page. It went to the server, got a new page, and it's showing it. But even on a page like this, if I start typing into this, and then I want to hit login, that all needs to be hooked up using JavaScript. And so the JavaScript is there to say, hey, I want to check what's in, when you click login, I'm going to check what's in the username input. I'm going to check what's in the password input, and I'm going to do something as a result. So the DOM is there so that the JavaScript can reference and update the page. Reading some of the comments here. So Islam John is asking, when you change the DOM element, does it re-render the whole page or just element children? That's another great question. Because this is part of what React solves, even though we don't cover it too much. I believe when you update anything in the DOM, it re-renders the entire page, meaning that it goes top to bottom. Like I just updated what the document looks like. So now it goes top to bottom and re-renders the whole document, even the things that haven't changed. And we don't really see that because it didn't change. But every time I click this button, it's not just re-rendering this one new part. It's actually looking at the whole page and saying, hey, the page changed because the object changed. Let me show what the page looks like now. And that's great for simple sites. But if you have a really big site, maybe you want to say, only update the part that changed, right? And that's one of the things that React does for you under the hood. It will make sure that when you re-render the page, you're only re-rendering the part you care about. Yeah. Okay. So unless we have more questions, I think we're good on the HTML, CSS, JavaScript stuff. Just here to demonstrate what we have right now and how it's a little cumbersome to use. Going back here, going back here. The next thing I wanted to talk about was limitations to this. So I'm asking you guys this question. What are some limitations or pain points of doing front end this way? Can you imagine any alternatives? So did any aspect of what we just did seem annoying?
It's extremely repetitive.
Yeah, it's definitely repetitive.
Like going back and forth.
Mm-hmm. And that's almost a separate problem. The going back and forth, it's annoying because it's like, why do I have to look at two files for everything? Would it be nice if you can combine these into one file? Like, what are we doing here? Why is it two separate things? we can call this the decoupling problem, as in HTML and CSS are two separate files, but they constantly need to reference each other. Why are they decoupled? Why are they separated? Wouldn't it make more sense for them to be one file? Yeah, so to me, that's the big problem. And we see that over here, that we have the script tag and the on click. So like, let's actually see how it's decoupled in two directions. So if I look at my HTML, that's my starting point. We'll kind of ignore the CSS for now, because that's kind of simple. Once we reference it, we're kind of done. But the main.js, I need to first reference it in the HTML to even know about it. And then in my HTML, I might start reading my HTML, and then I say, what's add Pokemon? I've never heard of that. Where's that defined? And then I kind of have to guess, oh, it's in this JavaScript file. And if I had multiple JavaScript files, I have no idea how to guess where it is. I have to look at all of them. And it's part of how it works is, so I go to main.js, and I actually have to define this at the top level. So this is now exposed everywhere, which is why I'm able to reference it in the way I was. So the HTML has to use, inside the HTML, I'm referencing a function that's defined in the JavaScript. But I'm in the JavaScript, and I actually want to update that HTML page. So I actually want to add something to this Pokemon list. How do I do that? Well, I first give an ID so I can uniquely identify that element I care about. And then in the JavaScript, I have to say, okay, get a certain element with that ID. So the HTML needs to reference the JavaScript, and the JavaScript needs to reference the HTML. They constantly need to know about each other, but because they're separate files, they have to do it in this way where they're, explicitly trying to identify a certain element or specifically invoking a certain function. And then I would say this is another problem and kind of separate. If I want to create something new on the page, in HTML, I would just write this, right? I'd write like li, hello, and then I might give it a class, and that class is going to be equal to world, and maybe there is like an on-click function, and who knows what that does. But this is how I want to think about it. But because I'm working in JavaScript, I can't write HTML. It doesn't know what this is. This is a meaningless line. So instead, I have to work with it like it's an object. I create an element of that type. I set some value. I set some other value. So it's not just that they're having to reference each other all the time. It's that they kind of speak two different languages. HTML speaks the language of elements. JavaScript speaks the language of objects. As a result, you need JavaScript to have an object called document, which represents the elements in HTML. And that can be done, but it's cumbersome because why are we doing this? They're constantly referencing each other. Shouldn't they just implicitly know about each other? That's what I think. I keep looking at the chat, and you guys are talking about food. Seems like a common theme. Yeah, which oil is the best? Sunflower seed oil. All right. So yeah, I guess my question is, no, don't be sorry. Can anyone think, I didn't just ask, we go back here, I didn't just ask, what are some pain points, but can you imagine an alternative? What could be a better way of doing this? Imagine you're, it's 2005 and you're like, hey, this is annoying. I don't like doing web dev this way. What could be a better solution?
I think because we haven't seen the other side of the fence, we don't know how much better it can get.
Yep, that's fair.
See why we have two different files. I do think having different files can help with organization, so you don't have everything all bunched up in one. So I think there's pros and cons to it. But yeah, that's what I feel about it.
And that's actually a very good point. We're gonna look at the React now, but it's actually very true that on some level, the main innovation of React is saying we're going to combine those two things. So now your HTML is within your JavaScript. And Angular, at least Angular 1, kind of tried to do the inverse on some level, where your JavaScript was in your HTML. But it's worth remembering that when that first was a thing, a lot of people were like, that's nuts. We don't like that. Don't put HTML in JavaScript. What are you doing? So until you see it, you don't necessarily understand why it might be better. And even when people saw it, they were like, I don't like this. This is new and I'm not used to it. So we probably do want to see the better thing. So yeah, I mean, you don't, this is what it feels like right now. It's just impossible to use aluminum foil. You're getting cut all the time. It's just, there's got to be a better way. Okay. So why React? So the first thing React solves is this decoupling problem. And the way it does that is it moves your HTML into your JavaScript. So that allows us to write and manipulate HTML as if it was built into JavaScript as a primitive. So going back to our example here, I did this thing here where I said like, new list item, blah, blah, blah. I filled it in and then I said append something, right? So imagine how much simpler or how it would be a slight improvement if instead of doing this, I could do something like this. I have this name Pokemon already, right? So what if I could instead say something like this? Instead of saying new list item, and creating it like this and then adding it, maybe I still have to add it like this, but what if I, imagine this isn't here, but imagine I was able to say something like this. Instead, I was going to say, okay, we're going to create a new list item. And my list item is I'm going to make it a string because JavaScript understands strings. And I'm going to say, okay, it's actually an li. And because it's a string, I can actually say, okay, actually put that name in there as the content. And then also for the class, I want the class itself to also, in this case, it has to be in quotes, but I also want that to be the name. And wouldn't it be cool if I could work with it like this? I could actually say, I just want to create some HTML directly in here. And then I'm going to add it to a list. And that's the first innovation React gives you, which is to say, we want to have HTML elements as a primitive inside of JavaScript. So just like I can just say in JavaScript, I can say const x equals 1. Numbers are primitive. I don't need to represent that in any strange way. And I could say, x equals 1, 2, 3. Or, I could have a string. Or I could have an object of some kind. These are all primitives. These are things that are built in to JavaScript. JavaScript knows how to work with them. Functions, classes. These are all things that JavaScript already understands as a basic thing it knows how to manipulate. You have like language level support for it. We don't have that for HTML. And yet, most of the time we're using JavaScript, it's to work with HTML. So wouldn't it be nice if you could just have HTML directly in there? And what if it wasn't even a string? What if I could just do something like this? Like literally, I just have an element right in there. Maybe it doesn't look like that. Maybe I could just say, that. And then I'm saying like, hey, I want to, be able to put name directly where that class is. I want to be able to put name in the content here. Maybe it'll look like hello name instead. But I'm just creating an element right there. And JavaScript understands it, or that's the hope. But of course, if I were to save this, and I were to look in here, it's saying unexpected token, open bracket, because it sees that as a less than symbol. It's like, what are you talking about? That isn't meaningful JavaScript. And then, of course, this isn't going to work as a result. So our first goal, what React is going to give us, the first thing it's going to give us is adding HTML into JavaScript so we can use HTML as, a primitive. Looking at the chat again, you guys calling yourselves hackers, cool. Okay.
So I remember like years ago, you'd have to use stuff like jQuery and Ajax and all this stuff. And like, I've heard that like React is like revolutionary in like this regard.
Yeah. So React is revolutionary at first, simply because we're adding the HTML directly into the JavaScript. So with something like jQuery, all jQuery is doing is it's taking things like document.getElement by ID, and it's making it a lot easier to work with. And it's also making it so that there's a lot more cross-browser support. We're not actually going to teach jQuery because at this point it's like a little less relevant, but it's important to know that these things kind of build on each other. So like first you start with basic HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then at some point you're like, hey, this is a little frustrating. At least it'd be nice if I had, you know, some helper functions, some way of working with all this stuff, and jQuery is that. So even though we're not going to be using jQuery, if we look over here, the dev console kind of has a built-in jQuery. jQuery is often represented by just this $sign. And I can use that $sign to say like, hey, I want that Pokemon list, right? And I'm saying I want something with class Pokemon list. And I thought that would get it for me. Is that not what it's called? That is what it's called, right? Oh, it's because my JavaScript is broken right now. Still right. Oh, and it's an ID of Pokemon list. So jQuery is mostly this. It's the ability to have this shorthand way of referencing things by their selector, and then to do something on it. So maybe there's like a click function, you know, and there's like, you can interact with your app a little bit better. But jQuery doesn't quite, or it only solves the problem so well. And stuff like React builds on jQuery. It uses jQuery under the hood, but it provides you an abstraction, so you don't even have to think about jQuery. Zekin is asking if React is a library or a framework. That's a great question. That question in general is complex. Like, you know, what is a library? What is a framework? In my opinion, I would say a library gives you a bunch of functions, then it's up to you how to use them. A framework, essentially like Django, it asks you to write a little bit of code, but it's running most of the code for you. So in a framework, the framework's in charge. In a library, you're still in charge. React is ultimately a library, I would say. It gives you a bunch of functions. The functions work a certain way, but it's up to you to call the functions and use them appropriately when you want them. But yeah, this whole library framework question does get kind of tricky because you could say React is a library, but you know, it kind of wants you to work in a certain way. There is a certain degree of magic happening where you're not really in control. And so it's sort of framework-like in some ways. These words are not like hard and fast distinctions. It's not so important whether something's a library or a framework. What's important is whether you enjoy using it. Because I don't know, you see it all the time. Some things called library, some called framework. I don't know that my definition is truly the official definition. I don't know that there is an official definition.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Okay, so going back here, I am going to right now close that HTML, CSS, JS file. And because we've been going for 50 minutes now, let's give us a break so we can start talking about vite. Vite is this way of getting a React site up and running because, as we'll explain, it's a little harder than to create a React app takes a little more sort of scaffolding and boilerplate than traditional HTML, CSS, JavaScript site, because we basically want to get, you know, the ability to write HTML in our JavaScript. That isn't true by default. So there needs to be some setup. But yeah, we're going to do that when we come back. So let's give everybody a 10-minute break. Okay. Anyone wants to ask questions during the 10-minute break, be free or feel free to, because we're still recording this so people can ultimately see it. But if not, I'll just stop recording for a bit. Yeah, Roger. Once we get into it, I think people will enjoy it. I really like React because I spent, you know, the first part of my career mostly working in Angular 1. And React is what I like about it compared to certain other technologies. Maybe you feel this way about Django. There's not that much to know. React is basically like a handful of ideas and then how the ideas work together, but it's really well designed. So like there's only so much to know. There's only so many patterns to know. And once you know those patterns, it's pretty, it's not too often that you encounter a situation that you're like, how do I do this? There's almost always one correct way to do it, and it's a really neat, nice way to do it. And I enjoy that. Yeah, I'm gonna get a little more coffee. I'll be right back. Ready or not?
Ben, could I ask you a quick question?
Of course.
Is this the part where we can start like coding along, or do you think we should still just be opening up what you had in the curriculum and just following along that way?
You can start coding along. What I'll say is, like, I'm going to do npm create vite. You can do it too, and that's going to create a project for us. But part of the reason I'm like going to point and use my own example is that, like, basically vite is going to give you a bunch of starting code that it's not really relevant. So I have pre-removed it. And so working with the example I give means that it's going to be easier to follow along, because you're not going to have to spend a bunch of time modifying the starting point to get it to like a more basic starting point. I'm not sure. It's not an easy question to answer. I understand the desire to code along. What I would say is maybe let's not start coding along yet. And then once we start using this example, then you can start coding along with the actual React part. Like you can go into the same project I will, which is over here, and we'll just start, we'll go in here and we'll start writing our own stuff. So I would say that part, start coding along.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Cool. So yeah, the first thing we're going to do now in this vite section, we're just going to bootstrap our React site. So our whole goal here is just to get a working hello world React app. So we just want to see the words hello world on our screen. But the reason we have to use this approach as opposed to the HTML, CSS, JS approach is because, like we said, we want to get HTML directly in our JavaScript, and you can't do that in regular JavaScript. So there's actually a bunch of tooling that's necessary, and vite is going to help us get that tooling by default, because setting up this tooling on your own is relatively complex. So let's do that. As you see here, the command we want is npm create vite. So vite is this project here. Can click on it. Next generation front end tooling. It actually works for things besides React. We're going to use it for React, and it's just going to give us some of that setup. So we're ultimately going to want to look. Sorry for moving around so much. We're ultimately going to want to look at this project that I already have here, example vite project. But to see it in action, let's first create a vite project from scratch. So yeah, we have a question, Chris?
Yeah, sorry. I was just curious. Do we have a virtual reality in the front end as well too, or is that just a back end thing?
Can you say that again? Virtual. Oh, great question. Right. No, that idea of a virtual environment that's a Python thing. JavaScript has a different approach, which is basically, as we'll see, it's per folder, per project. So you actually never need to mess with that. The only downside is that if you have multiple projects, they might be referencing a different version of the same dependency, but who cares, right? In my opinion, who cares? I think it's way simpler. So let's start seeing this npm create vite. So I'm going to go back here. I'll just do it in this examples folder. So I'm going to make my own thing. So I'll say npm create vite. And then I'll hit enter. And it actually gives us a little wizard. So first it's going to ask us for the project name, which is the same as the folder name. So I might name this, maybe I'm making a to-do app. So I'll say to-do app. Okay, and now it's actually giving us some choices because it works with a bunch of different frameworks, but we want to work with React, so we'll choose that. Now it's giving us some options. I don't even understand what the SWC on these last two means, but the basic options are JavaScript or TypeScript. We haven't really learned TypeScript. It's a little beyond the scope of this course. We might touch on it this week if people are interested. But we're going to choose JavaScript. And now it made it for us. So now if I do ls, I'll see I actually have a folder called to do app, and it's telling me what to do. Go in there, install npm run dev. So let's go in there. And the first thing I'm going to do is do code dot, because I want to open it up and I'll work with it from here. So there's a bunch of files to look at here. We don't necessarily need to, like this vite config. I've never touched it, but it's what lets vite know we're working with React. In JavaScript in general, package.json is pretty important. Package.json represents the configuration file for your whole project. So I'm not going to change any of this stuff. But importantly here, we have scripts. So these are things I could actually run. And if I have a script called dev, that means I can do npm run dev, and that'll actually run whatever this is. So in this case, it runs the script vite. So if I try that, it's actually going to break. That's because I never installed my dependencies. So the next thing we see are some dependencies. That means that React is a project or a dependency we want to use, as is this thing React DOM, which is related. Then we have this thing dev dependencies, which is the distinction is not really important for the most part. The difference is that if we ever were to build our package, so like here, npm run build, that's going to put everything into one file for the sake of distributing our website. And in that case, we only want to bundle it with the dependencies the project needs, not the dependencies our dev environment needs. So they make a little distinction there. But in order to get these dependencies, we have to type npm install, which a lot of people like to know that npm I also works. Let's be explicit and write npm install. So just like when you use pip, we're now downloading everything in there. Okay. And what you'll see now is there's now a folder here called node modules. If I open that up, there's a lot in here. So what happened is it downloaded these dependencies, React and React DOM, but they themselves had other dependencies. So it downloaded all of it. But what this does is it allows you to now reference React in your project. And unlike Python with the virtual environment, you never have to think about that. Each folder is its own environment. Each folder has its own dependencies, or each project rather. The root folder of a project will have something in it called node modules, and that's where all the dependencies live. You'll also see after you do that once, you'll get this file package-lock.json. You're never supposed to read this file or modify it. It's like Git, basically. It just is keeping track of any changes you ever make to your packages. Okay, so now that we've done that, I can actually do npm run. And the thing I want to run here is right here, dev. So that's going to spin up a dev server for us to serve this app. So I wait, and then I'll see, okay, localhost 5173. I can click on that. And I actually have a working React app now, and you'll see that it works. I can click this, and we're already seeing we're getting something that's harder to do without React, which is, we have this moving counter. We have some nice stuff here. But yeah, so this is working, but something I will say is that while this is working, it gave us a little more than we need, because I just want a basic hello world app. So I'm going to go back here now, and this is gonna, if I make changes, this is going to automatically know. So I'm not trashing this, but I'm basically closing this out right now just to say I don't need to look at it. And now the idea is well, what do we actually care about? Well, most of this is going to happen in the source folder. That's where all of our React stuff lives. Then there's this public folder if you want to serve up, a specific thing. So this was I think that this is that vite SVG. So if I were open this in code or in the browser, that's that's this symbol right here. I'm going to delete this public folder. It doesn't really matter. You could just not reference it, but we don't need it right now. Now we're going to look in here. So also this assets folder, that's react.svg. That's this spinning thing over here. I also don't need it. So I'm going to delete that whole assets folder. And then you'll also notice, okay, so where's our starting point? Our starting point, well, our starting point still, like always, is index.html. If I look in here, you'll see, okay, we're, referencing some icon. I don't need that. And then there's two things. We have a div with ID of root, and we have a script pointing to source main.jsx. That's all that's in there. So let's look at source main.jsx because that's our starting point for our app. We'll explain how all this works eventually, but the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take out this CSS file, but notice I can reference CSS directly from my JavaScript now. So this CSS file is just regular CSS, but I'm able to reference it directly like this, right? Import that file, and then it's as if it's in the project. But for right now, I want to get rid of that. And we'll explain how all this works, but for right now, this is just the setup, and this is rendering a single component from React called app.js. So I also don't need that CSS file. And I'm going to take this out too, just another CSS file. So if I look in app.jsx, there's another CSS file, but I don't want it because I just want the most basic version of this. So now I'm going to go in app.jsx. And again, I'm going to be able to get rid of all of this. This is just for them to show something fancy. I'll get rid of this. I'll get rid of all of this. But as you see, we're actually able to write, HTML directly in our JavaScript. And that's why this isn't .js, it's .jsx. It's actually a different file format that, React works with, that React created. And basically it's just JavaScript, but with the addition of being able to work directly with HTML right in there as if it's a primitive. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of that out. Okay. And I'm going to return just something like h1 hello world. Now, if I go here, I have a basic working site. So that's how we go from vite to basic working site. Basically just delete a bunch of things and we run, npm install and npm run dev. But that's why I want to work with the file I started with, or the example file I have, because this setup phase can take a minute. Okay, gonna look at some chat right now.
Is this a one-time thing, or are we going to be doing this for all our React projects?
If you were to make a project from scratch, you would do npm create vite, and you'd make the project from scratch, and you'd probably want to remove some of the starting stuff. For the projects, for the assignments at least, and the assessment, we're just going to ask you to clone something where that's already been done. So this vite part is just about creating this sort of, basic setup of the project. But you're not going to be doing it yourself for the most part. For the most part, it's going to be, you start with it, and then you're really only working in this source folder, and then you're modifying, something like this. So, it says hello world right now. If I go back here, I can say goodbye world. I save it. When I go back, it says goodbye world. So it's just about setting up that basic, setup so you could start working in React.
So what do we benefit from by using vite?
What you benefit from is that you see this right here. This is not standard JavaScript. In order to do this, you need JSX, which is like an JavaScript edition, right?
Yeah, well, I thought the JSX was from React. I thought that's what React was giving us to do. So I'm wondering what vite was giving us. I haven't seen it before, and I've seen some tutorials where they go through the React and they weren't using the vite. So it's kind of curious what we get from that.
React ultimately, so if I were to go to like main.jsx, React is being used, right? React is what allows me to like render that function we just saw in app as a component, and we'll get into that. But there's nothing about React that necessarily can change the language. So if I were to write this in a way that was perfectly JavaScript compatible, and this is all that's ultimately happening under the hood, I'm not actually returning something like this. I'm returning something that's more like this. It's literally, you know, something JavaScript already recognizes. It's going to have an H1, and then I'm going to have a list of like, what do you call it? Like if I had any like attributes, like, you know, on click or something. And then finally what was inside of there, which was hello world. But this is kind of difficult to read, especially as it gets bigger. So it's way nicer to be able to write something like this, right? Now to get that, we actually need to take this language called JSX and convert it to standard JavaScript. That step is called transpilation. Doing that from scratch is very hard. You have to download a library called Webpack and you have to set it up. Vite's doing all of that for us. So that's the main reason why we're using Vite, so that we can write HTML right in our JavaScript, and we don't need to worry about the tooling to make that possible.
And
Okay.
is this standard practice, like to go about it this way?
Yes,
To
using something
avoid
like
all those
Vite.
extra steps?
Say that again.
It's standard practice. That way you avoid all those extra steps.
Exactly. So the reason to use Vite, and there's alternatives like a React or Facebook themselves make because Facebook makes React, they make a even simpler library called create-react-app. That's another way of just getting this set up really quickly. If you were to do it from scratch, you can, and there's times where someone might want to do that if they want fine-grained control. But to do that, you need to use a pretty complex library called Webpack. And it's too complex to teach Webpack. So instead, we use this approach. We don't see Webpack anywhere because Vite set it all up for us. But I'm pretty sure Vite under the hood is using Webpack. So if we look in here, I bet Webpack is in here somewhere. Maybe not. I don't know. But it's using something like that. Oh, it's using Rollup, I believe. We look at our Rollup. So that's like, there's these different libraries that help you with that, like, you know, translate one thing to another thing. And Vite just does it for us. It's already using those libraries. And that makes it easier for us. So yeah, it's pretty standard if you're going to be working in React that you're going to want to use Create React App or Vite, or Next.js is another one. And they're all different levels of power in terms of what they give you. But what they'll all give you is this basic ability to now start working with JSX as opposed to JavaScript. Okay, looking at the chat. Yeah, Grace, I hear you on that. It does often feel like making up words. I'd say one of the big benefits to a bootcamp, as opposed to doing this on your own, is that, especially with front end, it's insane to try and do it if you've never done it, because you go on the internet and everyone's like 50 libraries you have to know. And it's like, it's overwhelming how much is out there because it's the internet. It's, you know, everyone makes their own library and says it's the new next best thing. It's hard to know, what do I actually care about? What are the, you know, what do I need as opposed to what's, you know, some cool new thing? And the only way you really learn that is over time. So a bootcamp is nice because it guides you to say like, hey, you need React. We're going to choose to use Vite. You don't need, you know, these millions of possible tools or, you know, libraries that are out there. We're going to stick with the essentials. Yeah, and Kelvin, you're right. Vite is like someone that sets up a construction site. It's literally what we call like a scaffolding generator. Like we use that same word, scaffolding. You're just setting up the necessary stuff to start working. You don't really care how it's done. You just want to start working, but it turns out, like everything else in the world, the more the more advanced something gets, the more it's built on top of something on top of something. And those setup phases can get frustrating if you have to do them from scratch. Like I don't think I could do it at this point. I wouldn't remember how to set up a React environment from scratch, but that's what you had to do initially. And it was, you know, an obstacle to adopting React. So now we don't have to worry about that. Okay, so that's our basic setup of Vite, but I want to go back to our document here just so we could see. Because I'm going to start working with this example Vite project. This is how we get started with it. And there is a cheat sheet for this, so you're going to have all these commands ready. But yeah, let's just read this right from here. Or I guess I can open it up as well. So I'm going to go back here. And I'll go back up one level because I'm going to use this project that I already created, which is just a vite project where I remove some stuff. And it looks just like the other one, you know, so just like before, I'm going to be able to do npm install if I haven't done it yet. Npm run dev, go back there, and this is my site, right? Now I can come back here and I could see these are the only files I have in here. So that index.html is what requests the main.jsx. You'll notice I don't have a link tag in here because in main.jsx itself, I could actually request some CSS. And in order to explain this, I'm going to start with app.jsx, even though that's not the root. So here's app.jsx, it's just a function, right? And I split it up from what we just saw to better understand it. So it's just a function like any other function. Because it's just a function, I could write, console.log hello, and that's perfectly fine. There's nothing special about this function. But if we want it to be a React component, and that's what we're building, the way it works is that I have to return something, and what I return is JSX. So that's the name of the file format, but more specifically, when I say JSX, what I mean is the HTML-like stuff that's within my JavaScript now. So I just wrote some HTML right here, and it is just HTML. I could say class, equals, hello. I can have whatever I want there. That's just that's just HTML essentially, but when it's within the React or within the JavaScript, we call it JSX. And then I ultimately return it. And this didn't need to be 2 lines. I could have just wrote, return right here, but I just wanted to break it up that I'm creating some JSX and then I'm returning it. And then before I leave, I do this export default thing. So just like you can export and import stuff in Python, you can do that in JavaScript. And so export default is this way we're going to export this thing app. So app is just a function. And when I'm done, I'm exporting it. So now I'm going to go into main.jsx. And remember, that's the only file that's pulled in from index.html. So I go into main.jsx. Well, main.jsx first requires some things. It's asking for React. It's asking for React DOM. And then I'm requiring my own thing, app. So app is just that function I just, created. But here's a pretty cool thing. So, well, the first thing we do is I split it up into steps where we're just like normal or just like regular HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I'm using document to get an element, getting the element root. So that's right here. And you don't have to do this most of the time. This is a one-time thing. So there's only one element actually in this HTML page, and it's called root. It has an ID of root because that's the element we're going to target to link up our HTML to our JavaScript. And that linking up happens here in main.jsx. So I grab that element root, and then I use this library React DOM, which is like a sister library of React. And I just use it. I mean, you'll never use it otherwise. You just use it this one time to associate that HTML element with your React project. You're saying, okay, I'm creating a root to my React project associated with that HTML element. I'm calling it React root. And then we call, and you again only see this once, you'll only see it in main.jsx. We call React root.render. And then this is interesting, app. So app was a function, right? App's just a function, but because it returns JSX, the nature of this function is that we call it a component. In React, something is a component if it's a function that returns JSX. So when I write this, it's just like if I wrote like H1 or something, but I just made my own element essentially. To distinguish between real HTML elements and React created elements, we call them components. What I'm doing here is I'm making my own component called app, and that's why I'm using the angle brackets. And that's going to get replaced with the actual, JSX that I return from here. So it's going to get replaced with this. And I could have written it like this. I could have said, you know, just like it was in H1, I could have said app/app. But because I don't actually put anything in it, because I'm not writing like hello in there, because I'm just, you know, rendering this one thing, I write it like this. And React doesn't actually like it if you write that, even though HTML will be fine with that. If something's self-closing, you're supposed to do that slash at the, you know, slash bracket at the end.
Why do you put a space?
What?
You have to put a space between the app and the.
No, you don't actually have to. I just like to separate the name from, like, you know, this, but you don't have to. This works just as well. And basically, so what we're going to do is we're going to have this replaced with this. And because of this one-time setup phase, it's going to be associated with this, which is here. So I know that's a lot of jumping around, but if I look here now, I can now look at my HTML. Head is going to be just like it was before, but if I look at the body, I'll see, okay, I do have this thing called div ID root. And there it is. There's my H1, and anything I did to the H1 is reflected here. So it has a class. And that's the main thing, or the essential thing React is doing for us, is it's allowing us to now write HTML in such a way that, you know, I can have that app component there. And if I were to go back here, you know, we're going to get into this more, but maybe I don't just have that H1. Maybe it looks, you know, maybe there's a little more going on here. Maybe I have, you know, I'm going to put this in parentheses so it understands, because it is still JavaScript. But maybe I have, like, you know, a div, and that div has an H1, and then underneath it, there's like an H2, and it says goodbye. And then, you know, who knows, maybe there's like an on click. I mean, maybe I shouldn't get into that yet, but maybe there's a, you know, a button. And that button says, click me, but that button is disabled. So just like regular HTML, we have all of that. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go back here, and that's all here now. So the cool thing is we have a really easy way of linking. Like, we don't have to think about HTML anymore. The only time we had to think about HTML in this was this one time, which was already set up for us. This one file, which links the two together. And now, from now on, we just work with JavaScript in the form of these components.
Can you show me the app element again?
Can you say that again?
Can you show me the app element again? I think I got confused there.
Yes, this is the app element.
Oh, okay.
Did
I
you
thought
explain
you,
the group?
Sorry.
Sorry, I thought you had another one that was like open and close, like between the carrots. Sorry.
Yeah,
Trying to
so
describe
right.
it.
We'll get into this a little more, but this is the essential point, that this right here is a function, right? I have a function called app. It returns some JSX, and then I exported it. In here, I imported it. It's still just a function, but this is the React thing. I'm able to call it like this. So I don't talk about it like it's a function. I talk about it like it's an element, which we call a component. I can reference it like this. It's the same thing, same name, but I talk about it like this because what I'm saying is, don't call this like a function. Instead, call that function, whatever it returns, which is going to be HTML-like, replace with this. So replace this with whatever that returns. So if I look
You
here,
can't.
yeah.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, if I look here, you don't see app anywhere. You only see
Okay.
what returned.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. I was like, oh, okay, so you don't even need you could relate to it directly through your CSS and just use app instead of, but I see.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's actually an important point, that at the end of the day, it's still all HTML, CSS, JavaScript, because that's all the browser understands. So this is not React aware. It's only aware of the HTML part. So we actually don't see app anywhere, although, do I have it here already? Something that is worth seeing is, I linked to this later, but if I were to search for Google, like Chrome dev tools React. So this is a very popular library. I can add that to Chrome. It'll take a minute. And now if I go back here, maybe I'll pin that so we see it. If I go back here, it actually knows about React. This page doesn't appear to be using React. Let me reload. It does know about React. Now it's saying development build, whatever. I don't care. The point is now I can click here. There should be a spot for React. Surprised I'm not seeing it. Maybe I need to reload again or refresh the page or something. Because it says developer tools components profiler, but I'm not seeing it. So I might legit want to do that again. But that's probably just because I just installed it. But if I open this back up and I do that again, I go like this, move it over. If I open this up, okay, I'm going to open up my developer console, go all the way to the right here. Cool. Now we have some React stuff. I can click components. Now this actually knows about my components. So it actually knows, okay, there's this thing called app, and it's going to have some information about it. It's not so useful right now, but it could eventually be useful. It will eventually be useful. And then log this component's data to the console. Okay, I've never seen that. Let me click that. Now, if I go here, it's actually telling me, oh, this is, how React looks at it. It's this thing. It's like, that's what it points to. That's pretty cool. It even knows that where it is in the source code. That's pretty cool. So that can be a useful tool as things get bigger. If you want to associate, you're saying, what component is that?
Yeah, it seems like it would be really effective if you just wanted one specific element to look a certain way instead of having to make a class or ID. You just call it by app or whatever.
Yeah. And I mean, the simple way to do that would be that you would still use CSS, but what you would do is you just go into app and you'd say like, okay, well, the app is represented by this div. I'm going to give that div a class. We'll see what this is in a little bit. I'm going to give it a class of, app. Why not? And then I go into my CSS and I say, okay, there's something called app, and it has a background color of red. Save that, go back here. Cool. Now that entire component has a background color of red. So there's nothing stopping you from using the name in such a way. But yeah, as far as the HTML goes, it has no idea that there's anything called app outside of us naming the class that. Because, React components are not real by HTML standards. It's just a way of us generating the HTML. Cool. So recognizing there's a lot to cover here, but, the whole point of this lesson is to get us started in React. So it is good to, I know I'm going a little fast, but we're going relatively slow by the standards of just, seeing it. So yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna go back here. And what else is there to talk about here? Yeah, so we saw here, this is our first component, and a component is simply a function that returns JSX. And because of that, you're able to reference it later as if it was a HTML element. And this is how I wrote it up here, but note that I can simplify this a fair bit. So this is how I would write it. You can just put that export default up here. And then we have, the function, and then we just return this in line. Like there's no need to put it in a variable first. And if anyone's curious about the export default as opposed to export, I might as well just show that now because it's relevant. So if I go back here, we said import app from /app, right? I'm saying just like import React. So that thing, not surrounded by any kind of braces, exporting default. So I'm able to say import app because app is exported default. You can only have one of those per file, but there's nothing stopping me from saying, okay, I also have something in this file called const x equals 44. And then I'm going to say, not only do I want to export app, export default app, I want to export x. Why doesn't it like that? I would assume it would let me do this. I'm surprised it doesn't want me to do that. Maybe it wants me to write export here. I think so. So I can only have one of these. And so if I tried to make this one an export default also, it would get upset. So I can only have one thing that I export default, but I can export as many things as I want with regular export. And then the way I would reference that is I can go back here, and this isn't about React. This is just about how these imports work in JavaScript. I still get the app like this, but let's say I don't just want the app. Let's say I also want those regular exports, not the export default. I go like that, comma, and then I do an object, and then I can just take stuff off that object. I say, okay, X and Y, I want those. And because it's just a JavaScript file, I can just say, okay, console.log X and Y. Let's get too much on the page. And I'll actually see those runs. So if I go back here, we'll ignore this for now. We'll see in a second, but we are printing the 4455. So that's all the export versus export default is. We'll see this later with other libraries and as we start using React, because while we mostly want to use React, there are sometimes other things in React we want. So like there's all these other things in React, and that's how we would grab them.
So you have to have a export default on everything. You can't just use an export, correct?
No, you could. I mean, technically, you could just export everything in this way, where I could say, like, let's say I just did that, right? It doesn't seem to like when I do it like that, so I think it wants it up here. But let's say I only export stuff. I don't export anything default. This is now going to break because it's like there isn't nothing being exported default. So we'll see that. It doesn't know what that is. But I don't have to export something default. I can just do this. So now these are all exported normally, and it works just as well. Spaces aren't necessary, but it knows what app is now. So export default, that's just a matter of, it makes sense that if you have a main thing you export, you might want to be able to reference it just like this. But you can have 0 or 1 export defaults, and you can have 0 or many exports. Cool. Okay. Going back here. We covered some of this stuff. This is like how it hooks up, and you don't have to know too much about this because this is done for you. And this is just part of that like scaffolding. It's done for you, and you're never going to have to change it. It's just kind of built in there that, you have that root element, and it gets hooked up to React, and then you render something as your like root element. And then from there, everything else is just going to happen in an app. And this is maybe like a more concise way of doing it. But it's not really important. I mean, it's the same either way. It's just JavaScript. So just to reiterate, what's happening is, we just like normal, we grab that index.html page. That index.html page is going to render, or is going to reference this file main.js. That file is going to look for something called root. So just like normal, we still have to hook the two up, but in this case, we only do it once. Once we grab that element root, we use this library React DOM, which hooks up React to that element root. So everything rendered in React is going to be rendered as a sub element to that element. And then we call that render function on app because that's the root of our project. So, and this is the part where, we had a function called app and a file called source/app.jsx. These don't all need to be the same name, but it's convenient if they are. So that's generally what we do. And that lets us reference this new component like app/. So we could stop here to ask questions before we actually start talking about React, but it's important to recognize that you're probably never going to have to change this stuff. So it's not super important to get started that you understand how it all works. one more thing, which I mentioned a little over here. You might have noticed that in the original project that was created, this was wrapped in something. So instead of just being app, it looked more like this. Let me open that up. Instead of just looking like app, it was actually looking like React.strict mode. And then our own thing was rendered within there. So by default, vite is going to do that for you. And that works. Of course, what this adds is basically a way of helping you catch bugs. And the way it does that is by rendering basically everything React does, it'll do twice in a row. And that can help you catch certain kind of bugs. But it can make learning a little confusing because everything's happening twice and you're like, why is it happening twice? Why is nothing working now? Because I have to go back here and fix this. Export default. But yeah, we don't necessarily want to do everything twice. I don't really have a good example of it doing everything twice right here, right now. But that's basically why for learning, you might want to remove that React.strict mode, but you know, it can also be useful, but I'm going to remove it because it will just make thinking about things simpler, especially once we get to some of the later lessons. It's nice to not be doing everything twice. Roger's loss, I understand. Jesse is saying the same thing. We can definitely stop right now and ask questions. My main concern is just how much time we have, because everything we've seen up until now is this scaffolding stuff. But we haven't really worked in React too much yet. And we are going to talk about that mostly in a second. We can definitely ask more about this though. So if anyone has questions or wants a specific part talked about.
I'll start. I feel like I'm probably the most lost in the class. I guess I'm just confused with all these different files. The relationship between main and app, the root, and how all this is talking to each other. I'm seeing a lot of variables, a lot of names, and a lot of files, and a lot of different paths, and I think just really confusing me, trying to understand where all this is connected.
Yeah. So, yeah, no, it is a little complex, and that's, you know, the benefit, but also downside to using something like vite. It's just generating a lot of stuff for us. The main thing to recognize is that if I'm serving this up, all it cares about, like any other web page, all it cares about is index.html. That's all it's picking up initially. So if I didn't have any of this in there, it would just print whatever's in index.html, which is this. But notice there's two things we care about in our default index.html. One, we have a div with ID root, just like regular HTML, but we gave it a name root, and it's empty. Second, we're asking for a script, source/main.jsx. So that tells us the next thing we want to look at is source/main.jsx. So let's open that up. So source.main.jsx, just like a regular file, you know, we don't know about React yet. It's just going to start running this file. So first, that's asking for two imports because we're going to use them. And then we're asking for one of our own files, app, and then we're asking for another one of our own files, index.css. That's just a CSS file. So this is smart enough that when we do this, it knows just, okay, add that CSS thing to the page. But what else do we do? Well, just like a regular JavaScript file that interacts with HTML, we're going to ask for that element root. So that element's the element right here, root, which is empty. We take that element root and we use the sister library React DOM to associate that element root or root element with React. So now we call it React root. And now in React root, we render our first component app. So now we're actually going to look here, and that's what we're going to render in place of it. So going all the way back here, we're going to take this thing root, and what's going to be inside of root now is whatever's in here. Which, you know, there's a lot going on there, but you're probably never going to touch this because this is the basic setup. This is what lets you know, regular HTML, JavaScript understand, you know, it gets hooked up to React, but that's a one-time thing. You're not going to have to change this file again. And it's already done for you generally.
Just to backtrack, so I understand. What's happening here is we are linking the index CSS file and our app file together in main.jsx, which in turn is linking it to the index.html.
Exactly, yeah. So this index.css, I don't even know how it does this. It's clever. It just knows that because you did this, this HTML page is ultimately going to have something in it like, you know, link, you know, whatever it is, type equals style sheet. It's going to know about that CSS page. It's just automatically happening for you. And then this right here is making it so that now instead of working with HTML, you hooked HTML through this root element up to React. You rendered this top level React component called app. And now everything else you do, you can just start working in the React world, starting at app. Hope
Okay,
that's helpful. Yeah.
that's a little better. Thank you.
Yeah. And the important point is this will generally already have been done for you. Or if you do, you know, npm create vite because it's a, you know, new project, this hookup is happening and it's not really the essential part. Like you're never going to see this library again. You're never going to call react root.render again. It just happens once in main.jsx. And then from then on, this is where you start caring about things. This is the root of your element as if this was your main HTML page.
Thank you very much. That really helps.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to look back at this stuff here now. So the next thing we're going to start doing is React Essentials, in which we're really going to break down what the essential ideas in React are. And as you see, if I go all the way up, we have a couple things to cover. And we've only covered this, and it probably was necessary to like say where we're at. But really, what we want to understand is what is React? Now that we've done all the setup, what are the ideas of React? And then this is pretty important too, common patterns in React, because there are certain things you're going to want to do, like work with a list in React. And the way you do that, there's sort of a standard approach that works, but it might not be so obvious. I mean, you might not arrive at it yourself. And so it's good to see it. But that's what we're going to do when we come back. It's 10:47 right now. Let's give ourselves a 10-minute break and come back at 10:57, if that works for everybody. See, Chris is asking, you know, is he understanding correctly? Does the JSX file embed in our HTML/JavaScript function? It's basically, I mean, it's all happening in that main.jsx file where your HTML, it's still just HTML, but it's getting linked to a JavaScript file just like normal. But then that JavaScript file is the one that is React aware. So if we want to see that again, it's like, it's over here. If we want to say it again, all we're serving up is this file. It's a regular HTML file. It has this blank thing in it, doesn't do anything yet. And just like a regular HTML file, it's able to reference something outside of itself, main.jsx. So now we look at main.jsx. That's where everything gets hooked up. We grab that root element, which is, you know, we're doing it the standard way. We're just grabbing an element through the document. Now we're using this library to hook it up to React, and then we render our top level React thing, which we're calling app. And from now on, we don't have to look at this file again. React and HTML are hooked up, and it's sort of like, because we ran this file, this, it's not quite replaced, it's really a child of it, but this is essentially being swapped out for this. And as we'll see, app can reference its own component. So if I made a different component that I called, like, you know, I could have a different thing where I say import subcomponent from, you know, /subcomponent, and it would be just like we did with app. And then I could say, oh, actually, I want, you know, subcomponent over there. Maybe I want 2 of them or something. And so once that main.jsx thing is done, and you generally don't have to do it yourself, it's done. Now you just start working with app. That's everything. That's your whole world. That can reference other React components. Now you're totally in the React world.
Gotcha. I think I got you. So once we link those two together, we're not really touching the HTML file anymore. We're working with
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you'll even notice like that's already done for you. So if I go back, let me close this for a second. If I go back here. Oh, and I go to that thing I created, the to-do app, right? I'm going to open up that to-do app. You'll notice if I go to index.html, that's already hooked up, right? Main.jsx, it's already hooked up. It's already referencing something called app they gave to us. I don't have to think about those at all. App is set up for me. So that's just part of the scaffolding. This is now where I basically start working and doing things. Yeah. Who's that behind you? If you move your head.
Oh, thanks.
Who's behind you? Who is that? That's you?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's
My
everyone should do
my-
that. Everyone should do that.
it's like, who knows? Maybe future employers, they'll be like, oh, he's that one.
Yeah, no, that's a good way of pretending like you're in a meeting. Like you just get up and you're like, oh, I'm paying attention.
Yeah, I have no idea, right?
Exactly, right. Like, oh man, he's so engaged. He's just
He's thinking. Yeah.
that's right. Oh man, that's probably gonna happen one day with AI. That's a good/terrible idea, which is like you could just have someone on a video that looks like you. Maybe it can even say basic things. So it could go like, I agree. Or like, I don't know. Yeah, basically you could, someone's going to do that eventually. Minimally interactive meeting guy.
Yeah,
And
you'll be
That one will do your eyes. It'll make your eyes look like you're always looking at the camera, even
Exactly,
when
right.
you're doing
Yeah.
playing something else.
Well, that's a great project. I mean, it's very advanced, but when you should do that.
people can pay to be present at every single school event. Yeah, all your virtual learning, you'll never miss a day.
Yeah. I saw a company that has this idea where they call it a digital double. It's not necessarily on video, but the idea is that like it's like an AI company for essentially building maintenance. So like buildings have, air conditioning, electricity, they have all these things that someone has to know about. And so the idea is like some guy creates his own digital twin. He's not always going to be there, but he sets the rules like, okay, the air conditioning has these parameters, the electricity has these parameters. Now my twin, he's always around. He makes the decisions. And then if I ever show up on site, I can take over. But when I'm not there, because I'm not there all the time, he's in charge.
Jeez, when they really start like integrating that AI, it's gonna be insane because you could basically make copies of yourself and have yourself working multiple jobs and stuff.
I think early on, there's going to be some scandal, some catastrophe. It's going to make everyone take a step back. We'll see. I just saw Mission Impossible last night. It's basically the plot. Like, the CIA has been compromised because AI, there's like an AI that's lying to everybody and it's infiltrated every network. And of course, the only person who could save the world is, the Mission Impossible force.
Of course. How he's gonna fight technology, I have no idea, but
But
Yeah,
honestly,
most likely, I guess employers gonna replace all the employees that said, I don't think you can have a double. Most likely,
yeah.
they're gonna fire everybody and just put the AIs.
I mean, honestly, it's kind of scary times for that because no one knows who's like, yeah, it has the capacity to transform things in mostly a terrible way, in my opinion.
I guess there was an Indian guy who actually has opened a company, a call center in India. He
Mhm.
actually replaced almost everyone, and the wait time just dropped like drastically, like 90%, and the
Yeah.
solution was up like.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, it's going to be Like I know they talk about this in economics. They have this phrase like the great decoupling, because in the past there's obviously been technological advancements, but let's say like, people worked on a farm and then eventually someone invented a tractor. Well, yeah, that tractor replaced people, but it didn't replace people outright. Now there were new jobs for tractor drivers. The problem is that with AI, it doesn't invent new jobs. It outright replaces a person. And so that can create a really scary future where like, you might say like, oh, McDonald's, like, it's not a great job, but like, at least they are employing like millions of people. If eventually McDonald's is a company that's all robots besides for like, the board of directors at McDonald's, that's kind of frightening that like, a lot of customers, like 10 people running the company, and then the rest of it's robots. That I don't know. I think something's going to give eventually. You can't.
Yeah, I guess some countries already experimenting with taxing AI. That way they can just help to keep some social programs at least.
Yeah, and also I don't think most people, like, obviously most people don't want to work at McDonald's, but I don't think society will do well if everyone's just, like the universal basic income approach. I mean, this is all politics now, but like, I don't think that's going to satisfy most people. People want to feel useful on some level. People don't just want to be like entertained all day. And like, I don't know. Something's going to give. The next 50 years is going to be kind of wild, I bet.
People always have the desire to create. That's not going to go away. I mean, people are going to have more time for their leisure activities to develop more technology and build art and things that they don't have time for now that they have to work, full time, 40 plus hours a week.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, ideally, right. People like, say like, hey, I have this free time, I'm going to make art, because no one's really ever going to really want AI's art too much because, it doesn't represent people. But I could see basically there's some people who are gonna like make art, and some people are just gonna like, loaf out on the couch, and like that seems fun, but it's not, I bet. Something I found really funny, there was this science fiction writer, Isaac Asimov, and he talked about this, a long time ago, how like, oh, eventually robots are gonna replace everybody, and then people are gonna have leisure time. What I found very funny is that in his version of the world, he's like, oh, people will like watch football on TV, but football is going to be played by robots. And I think that's very funny that Isaac Asimov was such a nerd that he's like, no one wants to play football. That's a job. He's like, obviously the robots will play football. And it's like, Isaac Asimov, a lot of people want to play football. Like that's going to be their leisure activity. But he didn't see it that way. Okay.
Well, what happens when we have people thinking offensive capabilities? You've got a malicious AI that can deploy viruses and all sorts of different stuff and attack systems. Like, you can't think that fast. Like,
it's
that's
honestly
going to be the
very scary. Like, obviously, this Mission Impossible movie is just fiction, but there will eventually be something like that, and it's pretty frightening. That like, even if you don't agree with certain people, like I'd rather have people in charge than an algorithm. Because algorithms move very fast and you don't always know what they're thinking. Like they're not even thinking. It's too complex. I don't know. I'm worried about it.
How do you know that you're not an AI and this is all just a dream?
Yeah, no, that's, I guess, a good point. I mean, I know I'm conscious. That's all I really know. But what that means, I don't really know. But great point. Let's not talk about React. Let's figure out what it means to be conscious.
This is now a philosophy class.
This is now a philosophy class. That's right. Okay, cool. So we're coming back. Okay. Really got me thinking now. Okay. So we're coming back. I'm just going to reopen that example thing. Just because that's what we're going to be working with. And I'm going to run it. I think it's upset because I have some dummy code in there that's not real. So in fact, I'll just remove all of that and replace it with hello world. And you know what? We're just going to return that hello world as a starting point. So as you can see, sometimes it doesn't recognize things without parentheses. That's because it's still JavaScript. But yeah, we just want to get back to this starting point. And right, we have that hello world thing. We have our basic starting point. And now we're going to be able to start talking about React for real. Okay. So coming back here, I'm going to scroll down to where we start talking about React in earnest. So everything we did up until now was one, seeing where we were before, and then two, the setup phase, just to understand how it links up in the way, things used to work. So now we're going to talk about the actual theory of React. And the core idea is what we call a component. So the first thing we want to accomplish in React is we want a full replacement for HTML. This is a pretty big deal because up until now, we had to use the built-in HTML things, H1, if it had, some attributes like on click, we use those, but we were limited to what HTML provides. And the first thing React is going to give us, not only do we have, HTML in our JavaScript, we're actually going to be able to make our own HTML elements, essentially. We're not limited to what already exists, even though those are the building blocks, we're going to be able to make our own. So a component is React's answer to an HTML element. And we'll see how we're going to build up, our own, we're going to build up all the features that come naturally with an HTML element, but in React. So we have full control. So this is, let's make a new component. And I like to make, besides for that app component, I like to put all my components in a folder called components. That's pretty common. So that's the first thing I'm going to do. Go over here, go to source, new folder, components. Okay. And now the next thing I want to do is I want to create a new component. I'm going to call it my component. So I'm just going to copy paste that. And in general, it's nice to just name things the same thing. So, we name it just like it was a class or something. The naming convention is we do it uppercase. So I'm going to make an uppercase component called myComponent.jsx.
And your app.jsx, didn't you have a component in there, the app component?
Well, yes. I mean, this is the app component. And it's referenced here like this. And
But why are those separate?
What?
So why are they separate? Why is there one app.jsx and then you're putting the other components in its other?
Yeah, that's a good question. Basically, I'm treating app.jsx special because it's the root of all the other things. Whereas everything else I'm going to put in my components because I might have many components at a certain point. I don't want them all at this top level.
Okay.
But you're right. I could just as well have defined it at the same level as app.jsx. But this is just to sort of say, hey, I have a lot of components. But app is where I start, and everything else I'll put in this components folder. But like all other things involving file structure, it's really up to you. Yeah. So you'll see here, I just export default. Just like before, it's a function. So we're just making a function, takes no parameters. And then we're returning some JSX, which is just, inline HTML in your JavaScript. And this is what it looks like. Any HTML will work. Okay. So now I reference it here. I go to my app page. And just like it was done in main.jsx, and now this is going to be our real root, I can say import my component. And you'll see it already knows about it. So import my component from, relative path. That's where it's from. And now instead of returning this div hello world, now I can return my component like so. I can save that. And now that's what we see here. So that's the basic flow we're going to see. Before we get any more complicated, we import a component and then we use it in here. And I did already have something in there. So let's say I go back. This is what it looked like, right? Well, I could also do something like this, or I could say like, okay, return div, and maybe this is an H1 also. Close that right. And then in here, I do my component. So let's see if it understands this. It works, yeah. So as you see, you could have more than one thing. And that's why app essentially is going to represent our whole page. And then everything we put in app, you know, we could have 1,000 components, and they could all be referenced in app. Or we could have, you know, a component that references another component. So just like we have with HTML, we can now work with these components. And this seemed to work, but in general, when it's more than one line, it's good to wrap it in parentheses in React, or in, you know, because now it actually understands, you know, it reads a little more like HTML when you do it like that. Okay. So going back to our document, this is the essential thing. So we want to make sure we understand it. Our component is this function. We export that function. We import it in another, you know, file. And then to reference that imported component, even though it's a function, we call it like this. We treat it like it's an element, and then it's just replaced with whatever contents it returns. And this is something I wanted to point out. That component is still just a JavaScript function. So if I go back here, like I'm calling it, or I'm referencing it like it's an element, right? But if I go in there, if I go in the definition, I'm returning something. But before I return something, I could say console.log hello from my component. And that should work, because when I reference it like this, it's as if I called the component and then I replace, just like a function, I replace what's here with whatever was returned, but everything else was still run. That function was still run. So I should see this console.log happen. If I go here, you'll see it happen. Yeah. It looks like it happened more than once, because React will do that sometimes. Oh no, that's just because it was refreshed. But like, this is the point where if I left that React strict mode in, we would see this happen twice, which is why I want to take it out for right now. But right, so what happened is, you know, we rendered app, it showed this, and then while rendering app, we rendered my component, which, you know, returned this, but also ran this. So right now we're still just working with functions. That's all a component is. It's just a function. And like any other function, you know, while you do return something, you can write some code in there. Okay. So
you can pass things into those functions too, right?
Yes, we're going to get to that. We're building up little by little. So next thing I want to talk about is components as containers. So the cool thing about a component is that you can represent a bunch of HTML together. So for instance, here, I'm going to create a new component called profile, and I'll define it like this. So going back here, I'm going to make this new thing, profile.jsx. So I like to name it the same thing over here, and I export it by default. So now I have a profile, and this is what a profile represents. We'll fill in the details eventually, but we have this H2 with username. We have a specific image using this placeholder site, and it's wrapping that all in a div, right? And so can anyone tell me now from here, how do I import and use that component?
You would import it from import profile from, and then you do the relative path of
And it already seems to know,
components.
Exactly. So I import from that file relative. Now I have something called profile. Now, how do I reference it here?
Same way you would with the my component.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let's say I leave my component in there, but I can do profile, and we just do it like that. I see in the chat, Dennis is asking about rerunning npm run dev. No, npm run dev actually watches things for you. So notice I'm not rerunning npm run dev. I'm not rerunning npm run dev. it's automatically picking up these changes. And if I were to open it back up, you'll see like that, it knows things got updated. So I can just run it in the background, don't have to think about it. So I created this new component profile. This is what it looks like. It's just JSX like normal. And I referenced it here, profile. So if I go back here, I see it, username 600 by 400, cool. Might even want to take out my component for right now. So I'm just seeing hello world, or maybe, I would say, profiles. Profiles, here's my first profile, but here's a cool thing that you don't have with HTML, but now you do have with React components. Well, this represents like a container for some HTML. There's no reason I can't use it more than once. So maybe I have multiple profiles. I just reference it multiple times. Each time it's replaced with the same code. Now this is what it looks like. So I imagine the next thing you're thinking is, well, that's not so useful. Like I want to, give it a specific username, give it a specific image. So we're going to get to that. Yeah, and Chris is asking if all components are self-closing. No, we're going to get to that. So we're building up these features little by little. For right now, everything we've seen is self-closing because it just returns some JSX. But the next thing I want to show you is important because it's a common problem to run into. So let's say I come back here and I say like, well, you know what? I don't want to, do div and then h1 profiles. I just want to show a bunch of profiles, right? Something like this. Just want to show a bunch of profiles. That's it. 3 profiles in a row. You can already see I'm getting these red squiggles, but what actually happens? I want to just show 3 profiles in a row, and each profile looks like this. That doesn't seem so crazy. Why doesn't this work? If I go back here, first off, you'll see React gives you some really good errors. Not only is it giving an error in the console, it's telling you a lot over here. And it's pointing out where the problem happened. And the problem actually happened on the second one. It says adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Do you want a JSX fragment? Okay, that's a good tip. So one thing we could do to solve this is like this. I could just wrap it in a div, right? So I'm wrapping this whole thing in a div. And now it should work. So I can come back here. Now it does work. And if I were to look at the elements, I would see, open up the body, open up the root. I have that top level div, and then each one of these is represented by a div. But you might be saying to yourself, or you might come into a situation where you say, well, I don't want to wrap it in a div. I really just wanted that div root to have 3 things under it, right? And maybe I'll give them class names to make it easier to understand. So each profile, I'll say class equals, I'll just use class for now, but you'll see we get an error, but I'm just calling that a profile. So each one I'm calling a profile. And then maybe this one I would say, or sorry, in this one I would say, okay, well, this is class equal to, profile list. Just to give it names so that we can see. If I go back here, you'll see, right, I have this profile list, which is all of them. And then I have 1, 2, if I could see it down here, 3 profiles. But what if I don't want that? I don't want it to be wrapped in something called profile list. I just want it to be 3 profiles in a row. Well, that's what that error was telling us, this thing called react.fragment. So React provides you a pretty cool element that HTML doesn't, and it looks like this. It's got no name, the no name. So this actually, like if we didn't use this, it would yell at us. It would say, you can't have just adjacent elements. But if I do this, it wraps them. So it fulfills the rule of only returning 1 element. But because I wrap them in this empty thing, if I now look here, you'll see it didn't wrap them in a div. It didn't wrap them in anything. So that's basically how we get around this problem. And it's worth knowing just because it's like the most common problem to encounter right away in React. You try and have, multiple elements exported as your, return. And it says, I don't like that. You got to wrap these in something. And if you didn't really want to wrap them in something, but you have to, this is your solution, react.fragment. And just to show you again, if I took that out and I click save, that's exactly what it's talking about. Did you want a JSX fragment? Yes, that is what you wanted. So put it back in. Now it's happy.
Sorry, how do we know which ones are gonna need that? We just find out, or is there a way to know?
So the only reason you need that is because React only accepts it if one thing is returned. It doesn't like it. If I do this again, it doesn't like it because I'm returning multiple things. JSX expressions must have one parent element. So the default solution is you just wrap it in a div, right? Why not? That works. That always works. The only reason you care about this fragment idea is because sometimes because of CSS or whatever it is, you don't want to wrap something in a div. You don't want a div there, but it does need to be in a single container. So that single container is the fragment. So the fragment is a single container as far as React is concerned, but as far as the HTML generated, it's not wrapped in anything. Can you give a class name to a fragment? That's a great question. I don't believe so because as you see, it doesn't turn into anything. So I don't think you can. If I tried to do that, the fact that it's not auto-completing tells me no. No, it doesn't like that. So because it's not, a fragment is just there to handle this one problem of like containing multiple things together without really wanting it to be a div. If you want to give it a class name, you got to do div. And then you have access to everything. And we're going to get into why this is class name, but React prefers class name as opposed to class. But you'll see here, it ends up just being class. Okay. So,
All right, one more dumb question.
What?
So, if you had all three of those profiles, and could you have parent parent elements for each specific one?
What do you
Or
mean?
you could not do that, sorry. If we had like a div and then a closing div for each one of those three profiles, we could not do that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, maybe we have something like profile container, right? And you're saying like each one of these, like I would have like multiple of these.
Right, could you still export them with that being like that or not? Yeah, I guess I'm getting a little confused on the exports and both can I do that?
I mean, well, you can definitely do this in that you can wrap something in whatever you want. And as you saw, because I put them all next to each other, I still have to use this fragment thing. And if I look here, that's what it looks like now. Each one is a profile container with a profile. But we're obviously repeating ourselves at this point. So at that point, we might want to say like, actually, you know, take that, but go back to what it was. Go back to just 3 profiles. If I want each one in a container, maybe I just want to go into profile and say, okay, well, actually, you know, profile is the thing that looks like that. And now I'm not repeating myself. Now it's contained within there.
Okay, sorry. If you have the same thing wrapped in parent wrapped in the parent elements as well, and you export it, it can't be the same thing, right? Would you do one export or would you do a default and then an export of the same thing? That's kind of where
I would
I don't know
say
if that made
it
sense.
sounds like those are 2 separate components. And we would export default them separately. So you could easily have another component called like profile container. So if we wanted to do that, I could, you know, I don't really have a reason I would do this right now, but maybe I have something called profile container. And, you know, we'll do this quickly. Like I have something called profile container. This is all profile container does, but profile container is going to import profile. And inside of there will be the profile. And now back in our app, we don't want profile anymore. We want profile container. Might be easier if I just, you know, do that. Why doesn't it know about it? Don't talk. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, I had to. Mom, come on. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I won't do that again. I won't do that again. Okay. I understand. I understand. Okay. That's my mom. Mom, come on. Okay. So this profile, so we're importing profile from here. We're exporting profile over here. And now instead of doing this, each one of these can be a profile container. So I'll just do that 2 more times. And yeah. Okay. Give me a minute, guys. You have like a 5-minute break. Hey, yeah, that was Mama Cohen. Yeah, so I did give you a few minutes, but if you guys have any questions. If everyone's still here, I guess I will just continue. I just have to break for a second because some confusion. Okay, so right, we have that profile container. So yeah, it's like Inception. You're not wrong that, like, app now is referencing profile container. We have multiple of those. Profile container itself does some stuff, and then it references profile. So this is just a way that we don't have to repeat ourselves over and over like we would with HTML. We have, we're using our components as these containers that we can repeat. And in a minute, we'll see how we can customize them. So so we're not just using a profile. Each profile is its own thing. Okay, so actually, I think even though we made this profile container to show it, I'm going to go back to just profiles for right now. Because that way it'll be a little easier to show the next step. Okay. So what's our next step? Right, so this is what our profiles look like. We have multiple of them. This was the fragment part. Okay, this is the next big idea in React, props. So just like HTML can have attributes, so that an HTML element like button might have an attribute like, class is one or on click is one. Well, with React, with these components, we give them, we give things different names to distinguish. So an element has attributes, a component has what React calls props. And just like we can create our own components now, or we can create elements with our own names. Similarly, we can give it our own, attributes, our own what we call props. So let's say I have this profile. Let's have something like this. So I'm going to copy all of this. So I have multiple profiles here now, but I want to make them each unique. So each one, I'm going to give it a different name, a different width, and a different height. The first thing to notice is this. So in HTML, everything has to be strings. And in the case of name, it's still a string. But in React, it's actually smart enough that I don't have to just give it a string. I can give it like a number, right? But I can't just write that number in there like 600. It's not going to understand that. So instead, I wrap it in these braces. These braces are called a React escape statement or interpolation. we're basically saying take a number like 600 and put it in there. And you'll notice here, I could actually do math in there. So any JavaScript works in there. So I can actually do 400 plus 400. It's going to compute this. That's now 800. And now the value of this thing height is 800. So that's us providing props to our profile. But if I look here, nothing changed, right? Because just like a function could take parameters, a component can take props, but we have to use them. So I'm going to go back to profile now. And these are three things we wanted: name, width, and height, right? So profile is defined as a function, and that means it can take parameters. But notice how we do this. So we actually only ever give it one parameter, and that parameter is called props. And if I were to print props now, I'm not going to use it yet, but I'll print it. What does it look like? So we only have one parameter. It's called props, and I'm going to print it. So go back here. I look at console.log. Okay, well, props is an object, and that object props has everything that I put on it. And just so we see it, you'll notice that, in app here, I gave it a bunch of props, and just so you could see this, sometimes, it doesn't care about white space. So sometimes it's nicer to do it like this, a little easier to read. So I gave it a name, a width, and a height, but I don't need to do the same props for every one. It could be that this one has a prop, hello equal to world. And I save that. And when I go back here, I'll now see, okay, this one actually has an additional prop called hello with the value world. These don't have it because I didn't add it to that. So all props is a single parameter that your component / function takes, and it lets you, it gives you an object at the end of the day. Cool. So going back here, this is everything we're passing in. And also notice that these are actual numbers. That's why it's not, red, but it's blue. So those are just like numbers, and, they are numbers. So I have the props here, but I might want to use each one. So maybe I want to first replace this H2 with props.name, right? Because it's just an object, I can grab it. If I say props.name, well, this is just a regular string. So if I come back here, I'm just going to see props.name. And this is where you need that interpolation. So now I'm going to wrap it in these curly brackets, which is React's, way of interpreting some JavaScript as, something to put in the JSX. Now, when I say props.name, it actually looks in props, looks for something called name, and it places it in there. So now we see Benjamin Cohen, Tiny Tim, King Kong. And that's what's happening on the side here. That's, we're just taking the name from each one of these objects and we're putting it in there. And each one has its own props that we provided to it. Similarly, you saw here I had width and height, right? So I could use those. And I want to use those here, right? So one thing I could do is I could say something like, let me take this whole thing here, and I might say like const image URL is equal to, and I'm going to make it equal to one of these backtick strings, and it'll look like this. And because it's a backtick string, I could actually replace these. So that was like X, and then I could put my props.width there and my props.height. And just so we see this, this is just a string now. I just, use standard string interpolation to, sorry, there's too much on the screen, to make a string, and I can print the string there. So you'll see that's what my string now looks like for each one. And then I can take that string, and just like with the props.name, I do image URL. And now it actually looks like we expect. So this one has a big image, this one has a small image, this one has a really big image. So that's props are the way that we can customize our components given some inputs. And just to see what this is like, I could simplify this, and the way I would do this is you could pass props in like this, but we generally want to destructure it because we care about what's inside. So we can do this in JavaScript in general but it's useful. So I take this object here and then I destructure it to say, I care about the name, I care about the width, and I care about the height. And then once again, I don't need to do this like this. I can grab that whole thing. Don't need to make a specific thing. And here I would say, well, now I'm just calling it name because I pulled that off. And here I'm going to put that whole thing in here and just reference the width and the height. And now the whole thing is still contained within the JSX. I just, grabbed what I needed from the props. So you could do it either way, but I like this pattern where, it's really all there in the JSX. That's all you have to look at. And it's the same thing currently. Okay. So
And I'm assuming you can pass in other functions as well into that function, just like regular JavaScript instead of just strings.
Exactly, yeah. So I think we'll wait to get to that because we do get to that, but that's another thing too, that because functions are first class in JavaScript, we can pass a function right in, and we're going to want to do that if we're like clicking a button or something. Okay, so that's props. And those are our two big ideas. So now we can make our own components and name them whatever we want, like profile. We can pass unique data into those components in the form of props. And now that's almost everything that we would need to create our own unique components. This is just what we did a minute ago. This is important to point out the difference between JS interpolation and React interpolation. So React within your JSX, it wants to see just curly brackets. Whereas in JavaScript, it wants to see, when you're doing string interpolation, it wants $ curly brackets. And sometimes you see those two combined because in this case, we're saying replace, everything in here with a string. We give it that string and that string uses those, string interpolation things. So that can get a little confusing at times, but you'll get a hang of the pattern just by doing it. And this is another thing to see that, I like, just calling it props and then destructuring it within, but you can do that right in the function parameter. You can just, you only have one thing in there, so you can destructure it like this. Some people find that nice. Okay, and that is the essentials. So we're going to get into common patterns now, but before we move on, any questions on components and props? Because those are our real bread and butter. Even if this is all React gave you, it's pretty powerful. Because now we can actually make our own HTML elements and give them our own attributes. And we didn't have that capacity with the existing, normal HTML.
So I want to ask a question about the height and the width that you specified. When you type those in, what does it default to for the units? Is it like pixel or view height or view width? Or does that even matter? Yeah.
Well, notice that when I'm passing this in, it doesn't know anything about it except that I'm passing it in. And then over here, this is where I grab it. And then the question is, how do I use it? Well, I used it like this. I used it to change what this URL was. And that's based on the fact that this is an actual website one can go to. That doesn't work. But if this is just a website where if I say 400 by 200, I think it gives it to me in pixels. But that's all that's doing. That's not unique to CSS or anything like that. That's just part of this website. And so that is an important point, that when it comes to working with props, it's really just about passing information from one component to a subcomponent. What you do with that is up to you. So like an image, for example, I think does have like a width thing. And I could say that width, totally separate than what I passed in. I could say the width is 1,000. That would probably overwrite something. Yeah, they're all really big now. But yeah, does that help? That like ultimately it's what you're doing with it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, if we feel good about components and props, and you'll get a chance to practice this in the assignment today, let's start talking about different patterns, because there are things you might want to do in React that are common that we should see. So coming back here, one thing we haven't seen yet, which is important, and that kind of completes the trifecta of what an HTML attribute or what a normal HTML element can do. HTML elements, one, they have a name, like H1, right? So now we can make our own things like that with components. Two, they can take attributes. We can do that now with props. They can take, inputs basically. The final thing is props.children. So in HTML, we can write something like this. We could have a div, and that div has a P inside of it. So how do we do that with something like profile, let's say? Well, let's say I wrote a profile like this. Copy, paste that. So I'm going to replace this whole thing like that. But I just have one profile now, and I'm saying the profile has a name. But then notice the profile only has a name. Everything in here is in the body of the profile. Profile only has a name. That's its only prop. Everything else here is the body. So if I come back here, there's only one thing on props called name. And this is still going to work, but this won't, because that other stuff isn't there. Let's just see that if I refresh this, I'm still seeing Benjamin Cohen, but where's that other stuff, right? So all this stuff here, where is it? Well, that's something we can access with a built-in prop. So when I saw props here, and I could do that, I could say console.log props. Come back here, we see we actually passed name to it, but there was something implicitly passed to it called children. Children, it's a little hard to read, but it represents all the React components that were inside of this, component. So profile, here's profile, and it's referenced by that function. It takes one prop name, but then it has it has a body, right? Because HTML elements can have a body. That body is called props.children. So I could do that here, just say children. Now I have the children. How do I use it? Well, just like where I say, okay, name is a thing, and I want to interpret that, I could just do this. I could say children is a thing. So now everything that was in children is going to be in here. And now I have it. So I don't use the children pattern too often, but it's another way of, passing something in. Okay, and that completes kind of the trifecta of what we would want to accomplish with a regular HTML component. We could do all of that with React now.
Ben, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit confused. You put a lot of details inside of sort of like the app function, part of the app. It seems like I'm a little bit confused by that. Like, why are we putting the detail inside of the parent instead of the the subcomponent where the details belong?
Right. Well, notice all I'm actually rendering in app is profile. That's all I'm rendering in app. But profile itself has a body. It has stuff inside of it. So this is a little contrived. This isn't how I would generally do it. But basically what I'm showing is that this is not actually rendering an app. This is being passed to profile in the form of props.children. Does that make sense?
You got it. Yeah, you're passing that in. Got it. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and this could be anything. Like it doesn't know about it. All React sees when it renders app, it says, oh, there's one thing in your profile. It renders that. Inside of profile, it says, okay, this is what a profile looks like. I had a prop called name. Let me render that. But I also had something called children, which is whatever was inside of the contents, because it wasn't self-closing. We actually put something inside there. And then children is how we reference everything inside. And that's where it actually gets rendered.
So I guess an example, if I were to create an application where I wanted the user to input some information into a form and then hit submit, that would get passed into the profile and then display it in that way, right?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely could do
it. Yeah.
The interesting thing is that this props.children thing it might be useful sometimes, but you don't have to use it that often, or I don't, because most of the time you could just pass something as props and then fill in all those details inside of that subcomponent, as opposed to wrapping it in some way. So just like we did this, like originally, instead of doing this, I could have just passed in whatever data I wanted. You know, maybe I pass in the whole image thing. So maybe I would do this. I would say like, okay, I have a profile and I'm going to make this self-closing, right? So it's going to be all ugly now, but I'm going to make this self-closing. And then I'm going to say, okay, actually, we also have an image URL. And I'm just going to, you know, put it in like this. Okay, what else? Well, we have hobbies. Maybe I'll say hobbies. And because it's, you know, able to look at JavaScript, I actually can just put an array in there. And in my array, I'll say pottery, yoga, whatever, dancing, whatever I wrote. And then now it's back to being self-closing. And now in the inside profile, I can do all that logic where instead of saying children, I would say like, okay, well, actually, we also have that image URL and hobbies. And then instead of doing this, we just, you know, have it back to what it was, where I say like, okay, well, actually, you know, we'll just put the image URL in. And you see, this is getting a little ugly because I'm refactoring. But this is closer to what I would do. And we'll show how to work with lists in a second, but let's just say we wanted to work with it like this. I could say, okay, this one was hobbies 0. And I could do that for the rest of them. Hobbies 1, hobbies 2, which would be a little bit legitimate approach if you always knew it was of length 3. And now this is this should be the same thing, except it doesn't like hobbies, but didn't I pass it in? Why doesn't it like hobbies?
I think you passed his all caps.
Ah, yes, exactly. So it obviously isn't going to understand that. But yeah, now this should work. So this is how I would do it, but it is worth seeing that children approach.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, so coming back here, we explained props.children. Some other things to see. Sometimes React renames things. So in React, you don't say class, you say class name. The reason for this is pretty obscure. Basically, they're trying to avoid a situation where it sees the word class and it thinks like JavaScript class, because class is a keyword in JavaScript. So they just decided to rename it. And it helps distinguish between the original version that's like, you know, class means, you know, real HTML. Class name is what React uses. And you'll see you'll get warnings for it otherwise. So like here, if I have class here and I come back here, it'll say invalid DOM property class. I don't know what that is. Did you mean class name? It's a pretty good error. So yeah, it just wants me to say class name. And now if I refresh, now it doesn't have an issue. And if I were to look at that specific element, I would see that, you know, when it finally renders, it just calls it class, but in React, it wants me to say class name. And notably, I could have more than one class. Oh, it could be, you know, be whatever I want. I could have more than one thing there, just like class. If I come back here, they're both there. And they would both get picked up if there were different CSS things, profile and hello. Kristen is asking, when do we get to see this done dynamically versus hard coding? What do you mean?
I mean, like grabbing user input and doing like generating things with for loops instead of just knowing exactly what's going to be in there.
Yeah, well, we're going to see in terms of the for loop thing pretty quickly. Because it actually is a little different than you might expect, because we don't actually use for loops for reasons that will become apparent. So we'll see that in a second. Okay, so coming back here, that was class to class name. Same with on click. So here's an example of us having like a button of some kind. So this is also my profile. I'm just gonna replace the logic of profile. Maybe I won't even do it entirely. I'm just gonna see that, okay, well, we want to add a button to our profile. Let me add that at the bottom. So here in my profile, I have, my list of hobbies because I did it this way, but at the end, I want to add a button. And that button wants an on-click handler. So notice I didn't do on-click like that. And over here, I didn't, reference a function like, my function. Instead, I did this. I said on-click, camel case, and then I'm doing the escape things, and then I'm referencing a function, but I haven't written that function yet. So if I go here, I'm sure it's going to yell at me. It's going to say, I don't know what on-click handler is. Okay, so I have to define it. And I would just define it at the same level. So here it is over here. So I'm referencing this function. And because before that return statement, it's just JavaScript, well, I can define a function. Define the function over here. I called it on click handler. That's what's being referenced over here. Because it's a click handler, I technically do have an event and I can look at it. And then in this case, I'm just using the built-in thing alert. So we're going to see an alert. So now I come back here. If I refresh, I'll see those aren't there anymore, the errors. And now I have this button, click me. I click it. I saw that alert. And then I actually have some event here, which I could, dig into and find out exactly what that event is. So if I add like event, the thing you often care about is event.target.value. There's obviously a lot in here. A lot. But if I look at event.target.value, I would actually see, like, if it was an input, I would see what was in there. Because it's a click, it's not very useful. So this is how we would have a function. Kristen was asking about, like, if we had an input and someone typed into it. We'll see more of that tomorrow when we get into use state. So we haven't yet gotten to the part where React does state, which means like it notices changes on the page and updates. Right now, all we have is starting with some data, creating a page that represents that data. And that's all we're going to do today. But continuing down this list of things we want to look at, the next thing would be conditional rendering with and the ternary operator. So this is an interesting thing about React in that React expects you to be returning something. It doesn't want you to be doing things imperatively. It doesn't want you to do if else or for loops. So we're not going to say, like inside of this JSX, we don't want to say if something, do something, otherwise do something else, because that's doing. What we want is an expression. At the end of the day, we're returning something, so we have to have a thing as opposed to do something. So how might we do that? Well, let's say we have this example of like, what if we had a profile without a name, right? Okay. So I'm going to come back here. I have one profile here. I'll wrap these again. So I have one profile here and I gave it a name. And let's say I had another profile and this one had no name, right? It had an empty name. So maybe in my profile, I want to say like, okay, I have all this logic. I have this name here and I want to print this, but I only want to print this if it actually has a name. So you might be tempted to say something like, and you actually can do this. So we'll see this. I could say like, if, name.length is greater than 0. And just to see it, let's actually print, console.log props.name. So we'll actually print the name. If names.length is 0, then we want to return all of this. And if name.length is not greater than 0, maybe I have an else in there, and I just say return null, because I think I have to return something. So that will technically work. And as I'll see here, in the first case, there was nothing. So we return null. It just doesn't appear in the page. The second case, there was Benjamin Cohen. So we actually printed this whole thing. That will work, but you'll find it doesn't scale up super well. You'll end up having to have lots of cases. If this, if that. The better way to do it is with a ternary operator. So you've seen that. If I take this out, let's go back to how it was. Instead of doing it like this, I'm still going to return in all cases. Let me just get that back. I'm going to return in all cases, but I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say, instead of like, if this, then that, maybe I leave the profile container, but I open up these brackets. I'll open up a bracket in the beginning, and I'll open up a bracket in the end. Nope, didn't do that quite right. I'll open up a bracket in that first one and then a bracket here. And what I'm going to say in here, because I can put JavaScript in here now, is I'm going to say whatever that conditional was, I'll say, I have names. If names.length is greater than 0, question mark, and I might want to wrap these in parentheses. If names.length is greater than 0, then I want you to print this. But if that's not the case, because we're using the ternary operator, just return null. And that's all wrapped in these brackets because it's JavaScript. So I save that and I get the same result. Doesn't like it because I said names and I meant name. Okay, try that again. Right. So now we see, if we look at the elements, well, it actually did print 2 things, but this one is empty because what was in there returned null if it didn't, pass the ternary statement. But we still printed that first one. So we could see that. We always print this, which ends over here. And then inside we have this ternary statement, which says, if this is true, return this whole thing. If it's not, return null. And React will accept null as just don't render anything. And that's one way to do it. And certainly if we had like a true if-else case where we said, if that's the case, do this. And if it's not the case, maybe we have a div. And that div is going to say no name, right? So in this case, we just have no name there. But if we really have this null case where we only want to do something if, and if it's the else, we want to do nothing, there's a slightly simpler way to do this. We're going to take this part out, and we're going to say, if this is true, and that. So this works like before, and you might be saying, why does that work? So this is not unique to React. This is still just JavaScript. It's just slightly, tricky JavaScript. The and is, the and statement. So we're saying, if this is true, the way and works is that if the first thing is true, it looks at the second thing. And in this case, it'll print it. Whereas if the first thing is false, it doesn't even look at the second thing. It just returns false. And React will interpret false just like null as don't print anything. So this is another pattern if you only want to print nothing. Okay, so that's how to do something conditionally. I know we're running out of time. There's a fair amount packed into this one. Any questions up until this point? All right. Well, I think there's one thing left we really want to talk about. And it's this. So I have examples here, and you'll see there is a cheat sheet for the whole day over here. So all of that is here in terms of all these different patterns. Let's see that right now. But the last thing we want to talk about is how to work with lists, because that's a pretty common one. So let's say I had something like this, right? Let's say I had, we're not even going to use profile. We'll make it really simple. Instead of working with profiles, I'll just say okay, I have like a div here. And I'm going to say, you know, I have like a list of hobbies, right? So I'll say list of hobbies. I suppose I don't need this right now. So for right now, this is all I have, list of hobbies. But let's say I want to print all my hobbies. So I already have them in here, let's say. And these hobbies are dancing, kiting, you know what normal people do, surfing. These are my hobbies. So you might be tempted to say something like, you know, do something for each of these. So first I'll have like an unordered list, and then you might be tempted to say, okay, open this up, and then for, you know, let hobby of hobbies, you know, maybe I would say like return, you know, some JSX, return some LI, and each LI would have a hobby in it. So you can kind of see it's already not liking this because it doesn't want a for statement in there. Expression expected. Because a for statement is technically a statement, meaning it does something, but it doesn't return anything. So this statement doesn't return anything. It just does something. So we don't want to do it this way. Instead, we want to use map. So we're going to take that list hobbies and we're going to map it. And the map function will take, you know, each individual element as an argument, and for each thing it will return something. And ultimately it'll return a list of these things. And then if I just have it on one line, I could just put it right there. But because I want it on another line, I'll put parentheses here. And now here, I could have that LI, and I could put that specific hobby in there. So it's getting each one of these hobbies and it's turning it into an LI. So at the end of the day, we'll have this UL and we'll have 3 LIs in it. So I'll save that. I'll come back here. You'll see it did work. And it's good to just look at the HTML because it'll actually tell you, you know, what you did. So we have that UL, and then we have an LI for each one of these things. So that is, as you're saying, Michael, you'll get practice with this on the assignment. Because that's mostly what it's for today, just to get practice with, you know, we didn't do anything with state. We're just trying to get the basics of taking some data and turning it into React elements. But the final thing to notice is that if we look at console, you'll get this console error. So React doesn't like when you give it a list and you don't give it this property key, because it makes it like inefficient for it to look up individual elements in the list. So basically it wants a key for each thing. And the key, it wants it to be a unique thing. So if I were to say like key equals 1, the problem is that each one of those keys would have the value 1 now. So now it's going to complain differently, encounter 2 children with the same key 1. So when working with real data, you usually have an ID or something. And in this case, each one of these hobbies is unique. So I could theoretically give it the key of hobby. And now it's not going to complain because, you know, if I were to look at it, let's say I was going to use that profile thing, I'd look at, you know, here. I guess it's not showing me the individual ones, but it's not giving me any error because each one has a unique, you know, key, which is just the word based on the hobby. But I mean, that wouldn't work if, you know, for whatever reason, let's say I had a list where I had, you know, dancing twice. Now we're going to get that same error. I don't like that, you know, 2 things have the same key, dancing. And so the way you deal with this is that map can actually take more than one argument. The first argument is the value, but the second is the index. So I'm just going to call that index, and then the key is index, and the index is always going to be unique. So it'll be 0, 1, 2, 3. And now we don't have the error. Okay, so we're right at time. I know that was a lot. I know we didn't really have time to, you know, do like a practice thing. The future lectures this week, hopefully are there's a little less information, but there's a fair amount of information here, and we have to spend a fair amount just understanding the setup. But everything you could need from this lesson, especially the patterns part, that is contained over here. So for the whole week here, there's a cheat sheet. And if I were to open that cheat sheet, you know, we have the vite information, we have NPM commands. Eventually we have this essential React part, and it's got everything from today involving these patterns, how you might want to do things. So let's just quickly look at the assignment for today. So this is an assignment we're going to be building up over time, but each day we're going to, you know, give you a starting point. That's essentially the, you know, the end result of the day before. So here it is, and I'm going to click on it, and you'll see that our goal is to use this like inventory to build a basic page. So I'm going to click on this. I'm going to skip to the next step. I already have this one, so let me get it over here. And I'll grab it over here. But notice that we actually are giving you both a main and a solution branch. So I'm going to come back here and say I'm going to go into uniform assignments. So I have a good place to put it. And I'm going to clone that. I'll go into video store part 1 dash, you know, your name. And this is only because of my thing, but you want to be on the main branch initially. And this is all explained in here. So the README will explain what we want you to do, how to install, how to run, you know, some sub steps you might want to accomplish. But we also did give you the solution branch. So essentially what we're going to want you to do is take everything in data, which is given to you automatically, and use it to make this basic video store page. And we can do this right now, where I'm just going to say npm install, then npm run dev. And you'll see this is your starting point, right? And the idea is we're going to want to use what's in that inventory to make our endpoint according to what's in the README. And we can actually look at that directly because we're providing the solution branch. So if I do git checkout solution, now I can do npm run dev. I'm going to go back here. Okay, now it actually is taking that data and showing it. And as you see, like, you know, we have the name of it, we have the image, which is all provided for you in inventory.json. We have the number available. If there's 0 available, you can't even click checkout. So that's something you're going to be able to do with React. You're going to be able to set true or false for disabled if, you know, it's the appropriate condition. And then if we click this, we're going to say, like, you know, there's currently 4 copies checked out. So this doesn't actually really react to user input right now, where if I start saying, you know, if I click checkout, ultimately I want it to, you know, reduce the number available. That's something we're going to get to tomorrow. For now, the whole idea is, given some data, can you turn it into a page? So that's our task for today. I'll let you go in a minute. I just want to quickly look at the chat. Yeah, so it looks like Bennett is giving some useful tips on things. I'm going to be around during the assignment phase. Let's see what we're coming back when. So, you know, we have nothing here, and then we have lunch, and you're going to be coming back at 2 p.m. for group work time. So you're going to be working with your groups today. I'll make sure to open the breakout rooms. But yeah, the goal of today is just to learn how to work with React in terms of components and props, and not, we haven't discovered anything about state yet, so don't worry about it. The goal is just to get more comfortable using React. Cool. So I'll stick around for a bit if you guys have questions, but you're free to go. And I'll stop sharing and I'll stop recording.